Senator Pappas,
Here.
Representative Baker,
Kind of excused. He'll be zooming in once we're up and running technically.
okay, Mr. Chairman, and we will confirm once we are in fact up and running with
Okay.
Zoom that he's on. I'm wondering if we maybe will see him. Yeah, I don't think we yet see him in the waiting room or anything, so. We'll confirm once he's here. And then. Oh, so I'll bet he'll be here pretty soon.
Getting close.
So, Mr. Chairman, next Representative Brown, you just said was excused, correct?
Excused,
Okay. Representative Burt,
excused,
Representative Henderson,
Here.
Representative McGuire,
Present.
Representative Obermueller,
Here.
Representative O'Hearn,
Here.
Representative Stivar,
excused,
Co-Chairman Burkhart,
here.
and Co-Chairman Landon.
Here. Thank you, Heather. Just a couple of opening remarks, committee. We're well into the interim, so everybody kind of knows the protocols and the decorum. And I just wanted to emphasize, let's try to stick to some high professionalism today. We've got a lot of work to do and lots of policy considerations. I look forward to those debates, but let's keep it up on the highway and do some good work today. This is being recorded soon, not quite yet, but we'll get that on in just a moment. And so I would remind you of that. Let's watch the side conversations because microphones can be on. And finally, just to the audience today, to our visitors who might zoom in a little bit later, I'm going to ask that we be brisk, that we get to the point. We look forward to hearing from everyone, but we don't want to hear from everyone for 30 minutes. We don't have that kind of time today. So we would ask that you get to comments as quickly as you can so that we can ask the questions we need to help us with our decisions. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple things to really echo what the good chairman said. I've gotten some feedback that the committee may have gotten a little lax in our decorum. So we'll tighten that up today. We have a lot of work to do the next 2 days. This is an aggressive agenda. I know it's caught a lot of people off guard due to the changing timing. As the chairman said, if need be, we will limit debate. We don't want to be here till midnight, and I'll tell you right now, we won't be. And that the one big thing is stay on topic, whatever the topic is. And I may remind you, if I'm chairing, I may remind you once, but that's the only reminder you'll get. And that remember to speak through the chair and direct those conversations to the issue, not to the individuals. We will be avoiding any sort of personal attacks, ridicule, anything like that. So I think that kind of summarizes the approach for this meeting, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman. Let's get started then. We will dispense with any motion on minutes, especially these days. Gentlemen, given the fact that everything is recorded, that's really not a necessary thing anymore. And so we're going to move on and welcome the general this morning.
And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to confirm that we are in fact moving forward and that Representative Baker is part of the meeting.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we're
you.
live and all that sort of thing.
Good morning, Representative Baker. Good to see your smiling face this morning. Look forward to working with you today. Glad you were able to get on. Are we now, Heather, recording and up and going?
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, and we have been for just a little bit. I just wasn't wanting to interrupt your decorum and your housekeeping discussion.
Yeah, you don't want to interrupt that speech on decorum, that's for sure. I do want to thank the folks from Oil and Gas here in the Oil and Gas Commission building. Always, you guys are great hosts and do a lot of work to help us have some legislative meetings here. So thank you, gentlemen, for all your help this morning. And Heather Squared, thank you both. We'll move on. So, General, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Landon, Chairman Burkhart, Members of the committee, it's good to see everybody today, and hope everybody had a happy Thanksgiving and looking forward to a Merry Christmas. To the point, I think we'll start very quickly. My name is Major General Greg Porter, and for the record, I serve as the Adjutant General for the state of Wyoming. To my immediate right is our Senior Legal Advisor, Mr. Chris Smith, and to my immediate left is the Director of the Vets Commission, Tim Shepard. We'll stick, I believe everybody has their slides, and we will also try to show them as we go forward. But let's just jump right into it unless the chairman has a different.
I say we fire the gun and here we go.
All right,
Let's
sir.
go, General. Thank you.
All right, sounds good, sir. Alrighty, I'm on slide 2, which really describes the agenda. We're going to go through just some opening remarks, try to give you some updates on some things that are going on in the military department right now. Then we'll move to the Oregon Trail Veterans Cemetery discussion, and then finish up with our veterans reports and updates along with the military department. And very quickly, as I move to slide 3, just some updates on what's going on in the military department right now. Currently, the Wyoming National Guard is executing what we call Operation Patch Adams, which is support to our medical hospitals, our nursing facilities and clinics. We have about just short of 100 personnel, about 16, 17 airmen and the rest Army, in across about 16 different locations in the state. Our intent is to try to give some relief to some of our hospital workers that have been battling the COVID fight for so long, and try to give just a little bit of break and give a little bit more assets to the hospital so they can do their mission. We're scheduled to do that mission through the end of December, but we are going to ask for an extension in case we do see some COVID spikes and our hospitals need us. So right now, we're probably looking at the end of December to pull most of those out. But if the situation changes, we'll be ready to continue continue doing that through the rest of the year and into next year. This is federal dollars that are paying for this. This is a mission assignment through FEMA, through the FEMA that's paying us that. So our soldiers are in a Title 32 status under their command and control of the governor, and they're getting paid that way. So that's how that's going pretty well right now. And from all I can hear from the hospitals, are very appreciative of the ability of our soldiers and airmen.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I recently had to have 2 COVID tests, and your guard guys were there taking care of all of that part of the thing. Really helping in Casper, Wyoming, that's for sure. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Anderson, for that. And I would echo that. Went down to public health the other day myself, and our guys were there. So really appreciate it.
Oh, sounds good.
Please continue, General.
Yes, sir. Military Department of the National Guard right now, we don't have a lot of deployments going on. On the air side, we only have 3 airmen currently deployed. And I expect it'll stay that way for a little bit, at least another year, unless something different happens in the world. MAFS, the Mobile Airborne Firefighting System, that mission we have that supports the Forest Service, was a really busy season for us this year. Probably the second busiest that we've had ever as a MAFS. So we had at least 2 aircraft deployed for over 43 days, and they weren't the same 2 aircraft. We would switch them, roll them in and out. But over 3.25 million pounds of retardant dropped, and over 131 separate missions. And so I just remind you that MAFS mission is probably is definitely the most dangerous that our C-130s can do. It's low, slow, and a lot of low visibility. And the members of that crew did it, or those mini crews did outstanding job. They just performed excellently. So they continue to do great things. Army National Guard, same thing. Not too many people deployed right now. I've only got 3, but we will start deploying again here in the spring. Right now, we'll have at least 3 Blackhawks, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 or so soldiers deployed to the CENTCOM area of operations. So we'll do that again. And I expect that we'll have a follow-on mission that looks pretty close to the same the year after that to get that done.
General, can I back you up just a moment?
Yes, sir.
On all that firefighting effort that we help out with, is that mostly federal dollars, I would assume? And is there any state dollars involved with that?
Mr. Chairman, you are correct. That is federal dollars, and there's not any state dollars that support that mission.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, General, it seems odd that we'd have 3 airmen and 3 guard deployed, and I'm assuming that means they're deployed outside the United States. Can you tell us where they are, or is that a secret?
Mr. Chairman,
General.
yes, Senator Anderson, it's not a secret, but probably it's not something that I would tell you in a public, if we want to talk to afterwards, we certainly can. And most of those are individual deployments, Mr. Chairman, that, a particular combatant command may ask, hey, we need this particular capability, this particular type of person who's out there. And almost all of these folks are volunteers, I would tell you.
Thank you, General. I think the senator suspected as much, but appreciate that.
Sounds good. Let me move to slide 4, if I could, just to give you kind of some updates of what's going on. We just completed our senior leader conference in November. That's a conference the military department runs every 2 years. And it's really designed to try to get to build better leaders at our senior level. So we just finished that. Governor participated with this and really had a great weekend. So that was a good deal. We've got the Wreaths Across America coming up here in December on the 13th, and a Gold Star Families event in November. That's an ornament hanging event that we invite all of our Gold Star families to the Capitol to spend some time with the governor and hang some ornaments in memory of their family members that were killed in War on Terror. And actually, we've expanded it. It's any family members that have loved ones that have passed away in any of the wars. So,
General, sorry to interrupt again, but just to emphasize one thing that you just brought up, that Wreaths Across America committee. If you haven't been able to take part in that, I would commend it to you. I think it's one of the most amazing things that we do during the year. We're fortunate enough to have Kathy Thomas as kind of chairing that effort here in this county, and she's been remarkable. And anyway, quite a day. And if you haven't had an opportunity to participate in that, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I had the date for the for the State Veteran Cemetery. I had the date as the 18th of this month. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that was correct.
Director Shepherd, what
Chairman
say you
Landon,
on that date?
That's correct for the cemeteries. It's the 18th.
The 18th
The ceremony at the Capitol is on the 13th.
on the 13th. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you, Representative. At any rate, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I like that Wreaths Across America so much that I bought 90 wreaths for the cemetery in KC, and we take those up there from this cemetery and put them out on all the veterans up there.
That's outstanding work, Senator. Appreciate that. But anyway, great opportunity to get out and salute those who have done so much. Go ahead, General.
Hey,
Thank you.
sir. Real quick, some leadership announcements. We have a new Air Chief of Staff, which is on the air side is a 1-star general. That's Brigadier General Michelle Mulberry. Took over from that one, so we're really excited about. She's got a lot of great ideas, and she's going to do a great job. On the Army National Guard, we'll have a new Assistant Adjutant General in December. The 12th, we'll do a change of command and a retirement. So I believe most of you know Brigadier General Steve Alkire. He will assume command of the Army Guard, and General Brian Nesbitt will retire from the military side of the house. We also have a new state command Sergeant Major Lindsey Schmidt. He took over this last summer from Sergeant Major Harold Pafford, who is currently in retirement in Texas. And by all the fishing pictures he sent us, he's doing okay. So I wouldn't worry about him too much. So he's doing all right. I think we are going to receive two new aircraft into the Wyoming National Guard inventory next year. That's what it's looking like right now. It's the Lakota aircraft. It's a fairly small aircraft. Those of you who may be familiar with OH-58 in the past, it's closer to that sort of type of aircraft. We're one of only a few states that didn't have that aircraft, basically because the engine wasn't quite as powerful enough for us to do our business at altitude. But we're going to get the new Bravo model, which has got a little bit more horsepower to it. The big advantage it does for us is it's got some really nice forward-looking and infrared radar on it. So that'll help us with search and rescue and finding those lost hunters and snowmobilers and that sort of thing. So we expect to get 2 of those aircraft probably late next year, and we'll be going through the process of getting folks trained up to accept those folks right now. So that's good for us. Real quickly on the Veterans Commission, we have a new chairman, Mr. Jake Jacobs.
Senator Pappas has a question.
Yes, sir.
Those 2 aircraft, are they going to be stationed in Cheyenne? Will they be hangared out there with all the other helicopters?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Pappas, probably so, but we are looking at other potentialities for it. It's just tough to get it away from, all that infrastructure that we have, but we certainly wouldn't mind putting it in a different location, but we're going through that stationing process thoughts right now. But I suspect that's what it will wind up there. But if we can swing it, we may push it in another location.
Okay, please proceed, General.
Alrighty, back to the Veterans Commission, new chairman, Mr. Jake Jacobs, and a new vice chairman, Ken Persons. I have to, publicly give Director Tim Shepard some kudos. He really worked very hard for this highly rural transportation grant. Received some additional money this year. We're up to $239,000. And that's going to be a great program as we continue to be able to provide services to our veterans in our rural communities to get them to services. So that's ongoing and continuing to drive on. We also got about 1.2 million in VA funds to do a cemetery upgrade that we're working through the process of getting that through, getting that programmed.
General, I don't see Mr. Person or Mr. Jacobs here. And so I just want to send a shout out and thank them for stepping up to help Director Shepard and Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just two quick questions on the two grants. Have you already decided how you will use that money?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, I'll have Tim talk that if you would. Tim, just to go to
Director Shepard.
Mr. Chairman, yes, and in both cases. So the first grant is,
rural transportation.
oh, yes, sir. Yeah, so that goes specifically, it's a very defined grant in that it's for highly rural transportation. So it's for those counties that the VA has designated as highly rural. And then we're able to transport veterans to and from VA and VA approved appointments. So that one's very well defined. The other one is also well defined at the cemetery for upgrades that we can make there at the cemetery.
Thank you.
So Director Shepard, just a quick tip of the hat on that front too. My father lived in Du Bois. Many of you already knew that, and so challenging to try to get him to Sheridan or Cheyenne. And so really tip my hat to you on that front. Appreciate all you do to try to help get our guys where they need to go, guys and gals. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
General, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, that new cemetery in Cheyenne, is that a federal cemetery or is that our state cemetery?
General.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, it is federal cemetery.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Yes, sir.
proceed.
We are, Mr. Chairman, thank you. We are the definition of highly rural, that is for sure. So it took, it took some really good thinking through on to get that pulled off. Really, Wyoming Challenge Academy, class 44. We've got 42 cadets and we're scheduled to graduate them on the 10th of December. They're doing very well. They did have a COVID outbreak. We had about 39 of our cadets come down and test positive for COVID there for a while. So, but the team did a great job, fought through that, and we're going to be able to graduate our folks here on time. Just real quickly on the state affairs side, we are getting a new set of barracks built in Guernsey this upcoming year. It'll probably add about 250 more beds to our capability there. So we're pretty excited about that. We got some money at the end of the federal fiscal year to get that going. So,
General, are those barracks going to benefit the Challenge Academy at all, or are they directed elsewhere?
Mr. Chairman, they will be directed elsewhere. I don't see how they would benefit them. The Challenge Academy's got their barracks already. So, yep. All righty. Well, let me go into continue on with the opening remarks and go into some of our COVID discussion. This is on slide 5 now. So right now, not too many, COVID's really dampened down pretty significantly in the military department. We're down to 6 current, 5 of our folks are in quarantine. We have no current hospitalizations. And it wasn't always true though. We have had a couple of soldiers and a couple of airmen that were hospitalized for brief periods of time to get them through their symptoms. We did have one individual, a civilian in the military department, that passed away from COVID. And so that happened in September. And so we certainly have not been, untouched by what's going on in the COVID world for sure. We do tend to pretty much reflect how the state of Wyoming is going. When you see spikes in the state, we tend to see spikes in the military department. And we did take some additional measures. We had everybody mask up, and we tried to do a lot more teleworking and those kind of things. And that seemed to really help us through that point of time. We're back to almost normal operations right now. We do try to keep big formations to a limit, and at least put them outside if we can to get that done. A lot of discussion going on about vaccination and where we're going on right now. Our vaccination rates, actually, we're a little higher on the air side now. We're about 87%. That's going on really because their suspense date to have everybody vaccinated is rapidly approaching in December, which I'll talk in a little bit. The Army's at 40%. Actually, they're a little bit better than that now too, but they've got a little bit longer timeline. They don't have to be fully vaccinated until the end of June on the Army National Guard side. Our federal civilians are about 77% fully vaccinated, and about 4 or 5% of them are in some sort of process that has the first vaccination. And then our state employees, there's no mandate for state employees, so we don't track them. As I talked about the mandates, 2 December is our Air National Guard deadline. End of June for 22 is the Army. Our federal civilians actually had to be vaccinated by the 22nd of November, and there's no mandate for our state employees. I know there's been quite a few just bits of discussion out
Senator
there.
Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, General, I know the president in his wisdom shut off commercial transportation from Africa. I don't suspect that we have guard or air in Africa, but do we have any places that we would contact those people that had been over there at another fort or another facility? Is there any chance our people would be exposed to that new virus that is really, really contagious? Thank you.
General?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, I don't think so. I'll have to think through exactly what you're asking me there. I will tell you, we do have a soldier in Tunisia, in Africa. It's our bilateral affairs officer, and she and her husband have been there for a while. But they're quarantining. They're taking care of themselves pretty well. The only other folks we have is our deployed folks running around there. And I just don't think offhand that I would never say never, Senator, that they wouldn't be exposed. So I better leave it at that one. I can't give you a good answer.
General, that's probably something you guys keep a pretty good eye on it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Well, committee, we can spend quite a bit more time on mandates if you want. Oh, that's right. We covered that the first part of this month. And so, 7 days. Yeah, there we go. So I think we're good on that front. General, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing, though, a number of us have gotten questions concerning the mandates and all the, by rumor, all the terrible things that will happen to an individual if they're not vaccinated. And I would ask the general to go into the position a little bit. I believe you have a draft statement on that, but if for the committee, if you would just tell us the position.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman.
General.
So a lot, as I was going to say, a lot of discussion going on about the mandates and the effect of what that means for the National Guard here in Wyoming. Had several cards and letters from this committee and those outside of the committee. Let me deal first with probably the first rumor, which talks about, this dishonorable discharge and what's going to happen there. That the only way a dishonorable discharge can be administered is as a result of a court martial, if you were court-martialed to get that done. So dishonorable discharge means something. And so I do not think that will happen at all. We're not going to court-martial our soldiers and airmen because they don't take a vaccination. So at least that's nowhere near where my head is at the moment. So that discussion of a dishonorable discharge, please, I don't think there's much to that. As we continue to talk about that the vaccinations, let me just be clear. I want our soldiers and airmen to be vaccinated. It's a readiness issue for me. Similar to what happened in Afghanistan when we had a measles outbreak. Our soldiers that were vaccinated against measles were able to go in and continue doing their job. It's the same sort of thing. It's a readiness issue for me. So I want our soldiers and airmen to be vaccinated. But if we can't get there, if the soldier or the airman says, absolutely, hey, I'm not going to do it for whatever reason, then I'm less interested as the adjutant general in punishing those individuals and giving them either a letter of reprimand or any sort of bad conduct discharge. That is my personal stance and where my head is going. Now, there is a lot of discussion going on out there. Those of you that are tracking understand that the two service secretaries have put out, this is what you will do in the case if a soldier and airman refuses to do a vaccination. We here are of the opinion that maybe that's not within the purview of the service secretary. These soldiers and airmen are under the command and control of the governor of Wyoming under Title 32. And as such, we don't believe that the service secretaries have the authorities to say what kind of discipline can be given to them and what kind of discharge would be given to them. Now, there is a lot of folks that have differing opinions on this. And so part of our strategy here to say is we're going to let this sort of move down the road to see where that's taken. I can tell you in the message that I send our soldiers, we have no instructions to anybody to discharge them or to reprimand them for failure to take the vaccine. And that's the stance right now that I currently have. I am having a conversation with Governor Gordon tomorrow to sort of develop that some more. I think he's interested in all those options, but that's where we stand at the moment. And I certainly stand ready for any questions on that or if anybody's got any input.
Thank you, General, for that.
Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate that. And I didn't in any way mean to diminish the conversation that's ongoing. Senator Furphy, did you have something? Did somebody?
Mr. Chairman, it's Representative Baker online.
Representative Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, I just had a question. Could you comment on what the Adjutant General of Oklahoma's stance is? If you're familiar with that.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Byrd, I'm somewhat familiar with that. And there's, again, a lot to that. As it was initially reported, it came out that the Adjutant General said, hey, my military department is not required to take the vaccine. As he sort of developed that, he sort of come out and said, hey, listen, I'm not anti-vaccine, I'm vaccinated. This is the Adjutant General from Oklahoma talking about it. And I want our folks to do it. We're just not gonna punish them or make them. It's a lot similar to my own stance from that particular standpoint. I think a lot of the discussion has come from Governor Stitt's letter to Secretary of Defense. And really what they've said is, until you answer this letter, Secretary of Defense, until you tell us these things, we're not going to move forward. And that's where the loggerheads, as I understand it, Chris, you can tell me that's where the things are sort of sitting right now. The Secretary of Defense has not answered the letter. I don't know if he will or not. And they've pretty much said, until you tell me the reasons that I asked about, we're not going to move forward. And so that's sort of where it sits. Representative Burt, did that make sense? Did that help?
Yeah, this is Representative Baker. No, I appreciate that. That's what I was looking for, is just a general idea of what their position is.
Thank you, Representative Baker. And committee, just for the record, I'm operating on about 1.5 ears. This side doesn't hear very well right now. And so I may have to ask for a clarification or something and appreciate your indulgence there. General, please continue if there's not other questions on this front.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize, Representative Baker, for getting your name wrong. I apologize for that. Let me move to slide 6 if I could. There were some do-outs or some questions really that had come up in the last Joint Transportation Committee that I just wanted to cover very quickly to the extent that we can. There was some intelligent, there was a question about reenlistments, and this was a discussion that surrounded the bill that we have to expand the trust fund to do some childcare. So this was say, hey, what is the can you tell us what the reenlistment rates are for those that can? And we've got some data, but it's not certainly all encompassing. I will just tell you that on both sides, folks with dependent children are slightly more likely to reenlist than those that are not. And I think it was like I said, that's about as definitive as I can get it right now. It's certainly not like something I would hang my hat on. Particularly, I would just take us back to, it definitely was, for a third of our force, a factor in reenlistment or not was the ability to obtain childcare. So, but they're slightly more willing to reenlist if they have children than if they don't. So I can tell you that. I think we talked about some salve and gravel, the permit near the veterans home. I think OSLI has an update on that. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if you want to hear from them now or at some later time. I put that to the committee for their views.
General, I think we'll probably hear a little bit later as we consider legislation on that front, but
Yes, sir.
that's my inclination.
All right, sounds good,
Okay,
sir.
great.
And then lastly, there were some questions about sexual harassment, sexual assault report, which I will brief here in the coming minutes.
Okay, committee, any questions on the general's comments this morning? General, anything else from you?
No, sir, I've said enough. That's
Or
for sure.
Director Shepherd, anything to add? Mr. Smith? Okay, we're gonna keep spurring the horse. Gentlemen, we've got a lot to cover, so let's move into the Oregon Trail Veteran Cemetery. We have a couple of bills to consider, but maybe you, Director Shepherd or General, you guys can walk us into this next topic for conversation, and we'll go from there.
Mr. Chairman, if it please you, I think I'll talk with Heather, and I think Heather is going to walk us through the bills, if she'd be so kind as to do that, sir, if that serves your pleasure.
And by the way, I'm going to save public comment until we get ready to work some bills. On those general comments, we'll consider those all together. So we'll do public comment here in just a little bit. So Heather, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before the committee are two different bill drafts on this topic, and I wanted to just say that you have them at your table because right around when you received these was also when our system was, we were simultaneously working the special session system. And it had shown that it had the correct working draft number, but it didn't have the text, which I only just recently discovered. And so that's why you now have a new working draft number. I iterated it up and made sure that everything in front of you is the correct version. It didn't change the text of the bill draft so much as the legal description, but the papers that you have in front of you, the version 9 of 22 LSO 33 and version 5 of 22 LSO 49. Those are the ones that I'll be talking about. And those were the ones that were sitting at your place this morning in front of you. So
Committee, just to add to what Heather is referring to, at the time that a lot of these bills were being prepared and we were preparing feverishly for that meeting that was to be the first part of the month, there was a lot of crossover with that special session. And so again, that's why we've got a cleaner version in front of you today. So go ahead, Heather. Thank you.
So I'm looking at 22 LSO-0033 version, working draft version 0.9. This is the Oregon Trail State Veterans Cemetery Buffer Zone. The committee saw more or less this bill draft at the previous meeting and then chose to move it forward to the discussion today when there would be a couple different bills and when they would just be able to be considering this topic more. So this bill draft is it relates to requiring the military department to secure a buffer zone for the Veterans Cemetery. That's the one that the committee toured here in Casper. And directing that the interest in certain state lands be transferred to the military department and providing an appropriation and providing for effective dates. So moving on to page 2, this bill draft is in the Title 19, which is for the most part the military titles. And it goes into the section about the Veterans Cemetery, and it inserts the requirement that the department, after approval from the Veterans Commission, the department, in this case, is the military department, shall acquire land to be used as a buffer zone for any cemetery established under this section and shall implement protections necessary to protect the pristine views and sanctity of the cemetery and to protect any historically significant sites included in the cemetery site. And then there's an additional change a little bit further on line 17 to just say these purposes, because the committee shall acquire the land for these purposes instead of this purpose. That was just a correction. And then that was in subsection A, and in subsection B of 19-14-108, it says that the military department shall supervise and control the veteran cemetery, and then it inserts the language and buffer zone. So that's the statutory changes. And then section 2 of this bill draft says that the Board of Land Commissioners is authorized and directed upon legislative appropriation to convey its right, title, and interest in the surface estate of the following described parcels of land to the military department for inclusion in the Veterans Cemetery that's established in the title that we just looked at on the previous page. And then starting at line 18 through the rest of this page is the legal description of that buffer zone area. And if you recall looking at some maps at the time, actually, Heather, there are some maps on the corner right there. Would you be willing to distribute those? And some maps that will be in front of you in a moment. This is some parts around the, it's probably some, is that the cemetery or is that the Veteran Skilled Nursing Facility?
That's the cemetery.
Excellent, that's the right one then. Cool. Okay,
Heather, I'm glad to pause here for a moment, just so everybody can get the map in front of them.
Okay.
And again, we'll take public comment as we go this morning. For those of you who have arrived here or listening in on screen, we'll take public comment on these bills, but we'll also take public comment at the end of this section of the agenda. So, okay, Heather, I think everybody's ready.
so if you recall this, the description on the bottom of page 3, the legal description, and then the description at the top of page 4, paragraph 2, that is the complete parcels. And I remember it was Representative McGuire's language describing at the last meeting to make sure to include the what used to be the blue rectangle, just so you know, as you're looking at things. So it's the amount that's there plus that little blue rectangle over on the right-hand side. So that's the legal description. And then subsection B, it just says on page 4, the conveyance that's authorized in that subsection A shall be by sale at an appraised value with terms in the sale to be determined by the Board of Land Commissioners. And this was following a model of some transfers that had happened to the Department of State Parks and Cultural Resources and a bill draft that had followed years ago, a land transfer there. Now, at your previous meeting, there was some discussion over what the valuation might be and what the Office of State Lands and Investments and the Veterans Department or Veterans Commission have come up with. That's to them to describe what their valuations may be, but the section 3 discusses that on page 4, and that's that the Board of Land Commissioners and the Military Department shall determine an appraised value of the conveyance that's authorized in section 2 of this act and shall report to the Joint Transportation, Highways and Military Affairs Interim Committee to specify an appropriation amount. So at this point, where this bill draft is, without an amount, then this basically would be a 2-step thing. So this bill draft, if it were to go forward, would basically, and you'll even see in section 4 with the effective dates, that it's the first part of the bill draft is effective immediately so that they can move forward on making the evaluation happen and the transfer and those sort of things. And that section 1, the actual statutory change that says that the military department shall have this buffer zone and shall maintain it and take care of it, is that would be effective following legislative appropriation determined pursuant to section sections 2 and 3 of this act. So that would be the way that the dual effective date to move forward, and then to have the statutory part of the with requirement later, once that part is once the valuation is effected and the actual transfer for that bill draft. Now, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Senator Anderson, you've got a question?
Mr. Chairman, Heather, it seems to me like the Constitution says something about maximizing the revenue from the state lands. I think that was referring to school sections, but maybe it refers to all state lands. So does this, if we move forward to this, is this maximizing the revenue from the state lands for the state?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, this is a school section,
Oh, it is?
and Mr. Chairman, that would be part of the valuation of the land and part of the determination. Now, the model that this followed of the several parcels that had been transferred, like I said back in, I believe it's a 2006 bill. I have it right here, so I can show us during a break if you wanted to see the 2006, where there were several transfers. I believe that one or more of those was a section as well. So the answer to your question is it the best use? That would be part of the evaluation, the valuation of the land as it is transferred to the military department, or it may be that as part of the transfer that they would determine that that the military department would maintain it for grazing purposes or something like that. If they just become the custodian of it, for example, rather than a transfer to just purchase it and have it sit there, it may become that they maintain whatever best use, which would perhaps be the grazing.
Senator,
That's going to be
follow-up?
part of it.
Follow up,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. So we're not required to bid it out and sell it to the highest bidder? We can sell it to whoever we want?
Yeah, what's the constitutional concern there, Heather? It is where the senator's going.
Mr. Chairman, there's the Constitution does require that the land be, and I don't have the provision right in front of me, but that the land be sold at an auction to the highest bidder, and there are some provisions for how the land is disposed of. And I just don't want to misquote it. That's why I was hesitating just then, but the transfer through the legislative transfer that and following the model like we're describing of from that 2006 transfer to state parks and cultural divisions, it was in the determination, if you will, of the legislature in the transfer that had affected that was the that was saying that was okay, that affected the transfer of the lands. And it may be that it might be necessary to look into what's happening with those lands that were transferred to see, how that was okay. But that was where it was an interagency transfer rather than actually, it's not leaving the hands of the government of the state. It's not like it's being sold to just anyone in this room in a private sale. It's still in the hands of the state to be maintained from that perspective. And I think that there's the combination of still be used for the best use and with an interagency transfer that made it be so that it was not necessary at that time, at least. And it was
Heather,
analogous to
in
this.
2006, was that a monetary transfer?
Mr. Chairman, there was a nominal amount. I don't mean to say that it's several $100,000 is nominal, but it was in the 100,000 range, 100,000s range. It wasn't in the millions of range. May I grab the bill draft folder?
Absolutely, sure. Committee, I think while Heather's doing that, I think this kind of drills down to one of the key important points. I think the committee's intention is to do all that we can to protect that Oregon Trail Cemetery up there. But this additional land that we would like to have set aside. That's the purpose of the bill. But we do run into the issue of that being a school parcel. So Representative McGuire, that's your neck of the woods, by the way. Representative, that's his district.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. So I think that we need to, and I can phrase this as a question to Heather, but we need to keep in mind that there are three different ways, there are three different issues here. First, if you're going to take a section of state land and sell it to a private individual, for example, we had a section out on I-25 that was sold, I don't know, it's probably 20 years ago now, that was put out for bid. That was a competitive bid. There was an appraisal, there was a competitive bid, and it disappeared off the state books. It is no longer state land, it is private land now. That's a whole separate kettle of fish. On the other hand, within the state of Wyoming, the state of Wyoming sets aside or preserves pieces of property all the time for parks, to put a school up, to put an intersection in, does that all the time. The third section is that we need to keep in mind is that all of these state lands are subject to the laws set forward by the state legislature. State legislature can make a law and pass a law with regard to that particular piece of parcel of property, and that's what's going to happen to it. The legislature enacted the laws that created the Board of Land Commissioners. And within that enacting language, set aside the authority for the legislature to dictate what will happen with a piece of property. And we don't have to get an appraisal or do it in any way, shape, or form. So keep in mind, there's three separate things, and nobody, in my opinion, nobody is trying to sell this to a private individual. The question is, do we set it aside and dictate what's going to happen? Which is what I would propose is the best course of action. Or do we allow it to be transferred to another agency and we can determine what the terms are with regard to that transfer?
Representative, that's very helpful. Thank you. Appreciate that. And we'll get to some further discussion on the bill. I'm going to let Heather, I'm going to let you finish up with your presentation of the bill and then we'll get to it.
Mr. Chairman, this bill draft that I was referring to from 2007, it actually transferred some from, let me back up. The school sections are section 16 and 36, I believe.
Did
I'm
you say
almost certain.
16 and
16 and
36?
36. I'm getting in a big grid pattern of a township. The school sections are section 16 and 36. And for example, in this bill draft from 2000, or not bill draft, sorry, this enrolled act from 2007, there was some from a portion from section 16 that went into Independence Rock State Historic Site. There was some from section 16 in another township that went into Kurt Gowdy State Park. And then there were some other portions, but just for the model of if there is concern about it being a school section, that's where they were from and where they went. It was into some of those divisions.
So Heather, bottom line is this is not a whole lot different than what we did in 2006.
Mr. Chairman, it appears as though it is not. It's to a different agency. However, Mr. Chairman, I misspoke and I misremembered the number of zeros. There was a $6 million appropriation to make several. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks like 5, 6 transfers. So no, my mistake. I think there was perhaps those were to state parks, and then there were also a couple transfers to the Game and Fish Commission. So there were another couple in this very same bill. So there were about 8 transfers.
But Heather,
And $6 million.
That can be a little confusing. Just for clarification, not all of those parcels that were transferred by way of that piece of legislation were related to the Oregon Trail Cemetery area. Is that right?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, none of these were related to the Oregon Trail State Veteran Cemetery.
Right.
I'm simply describing that they were transfers from the Board of Land Commissioners was authorized, just like in this bill draft. You'll see that on the page, on the very first part on page 2, that, oh, I bet, on page 3 in the middle, the Board of Land Commissioners is authorized and directed to transfer the lands. And so that's what was happened with
That's
in that
exactly what
bill.
we did in 2006.
They were authorized and directed to convey their lands.
Albeit some different parcels. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you.
yes.
Thank you, Heather. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Heather, with that transfer, you said there was a $6 million appropriation. Was that appropriation, how do I want to put this, on paper? I mean, I don't think that one state agency is going to actually pay another state agency. I think the appropriation may have been in order to facilitate the transfer and just to appropriate that transfer rather than to actually move money around. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, I think that you are correct. However, I don't want to misspeak on the very much the details. But I can tell you that that appropriation, it was appropriated from what I understand to be an account that, as I was drafting this bill, would not have been, it's either no longer used or something, because it was appropriated an amount not to exceed $6 million from the budget reserve account to the state land board for the period, for just like it was only 1 year for the purposes of funding the purchases provided in section 1 of this act. And then funds reverted. So it seems as though what you're describing being from the budget reserve account and things that it was perhaps to shift the accounting for the lands from one agency to another.
So follow up, Mr. Co-Chairman.
No, I'm happy.
So Heather, I guess my confusion rests on a couple of points, but one of them is you just mentioned that transfer or that budget amount would go to the state lands board. It seems to me that if we were buying it from ourselves, it would go to the common school permanent land fund, would it not?
Mr.
And we can look that up as if the bill moves forward, we can drill down and make sure that we've got that covered, everyone, because we probably will get asked that.
Mr. Chairman, I do think that was even an earlier version of a draft of this bill when we were anticipating that we may have an actual amount before we did the stepped, the 2 effective dates, the one to get moving and then the effective date that would actually create the transfer upon when there's the actual valuation. But I do believe that when we were anticipating that we may have an amount, that is what we had done, was send it to the, Mr. Chairman. I'm just looking at an earlier version. Yes, I believe that we went to. I think you're correct, Mr. Chairman, but would need to look into it depending on the committee's wishes. And also knowing that I think the committee's wishes may be this bill or the other bill rather than both. And so it would be prudent to look into that if this is the bill of the 2 that moves forward.
Committee, as you can tell, this is one we'll have to make sure that we have our T's crossed and I's dotted so that we can present this on whatever floor it might land. And it can be a little confusing. So we'll want to make sure that we have that tightened down pretty good, where the money would go and how it would be budgeted and et cetera, et cetera. So Heather, go ahead and proceed and finish up on the bill if you would.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, well, you just said to proceed with the bill. I was at the end of that bill, but I didn't know if the committee was, as part of its discussion, wanting to then look at the other one so that it could be having both on its mind or not. But I'm finished with this bill.
Okay, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Heather, a couple questions, and I agree with the chairman that we need to make sure we have, that we, is that better? Okay, thank you. We need to make sure that we have everything really in order. So general question, we require legislative appropriation to make this change, to transfer. Would the intent be that that come in the appropriations bill, or the intent? We've had this discussion on another bill where we use that language of what that actually means. Do we need to narrow that focus on legislative authorization or appropriation to do that?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Burkhart, the way that this bill drafts is drafted, although it can be as the committee would choose, but currently, if you look at page 5, this is the section 4 and the effective dates. So subsection A on page 5 indicates that except as provided in subsection B, this act is effective immediately upon completion of all acts. So it anticipates that this bill would pass at the upcoming session. And that would mean that, and then subsection B is that subsection 1 of the act is what's effective following a legislative appropriation determined to make sections 2 and 3 happen. So that the section 1 of this act was the statutory changes. So that would not go into effect until after this act. And what would go into effect when this act pass is that section 2 authorizing the Board of Land Commissioners to convey its title upon legislative appropriation, and then section 3, where the land commissioners and the military department are supposed to determine an appraised value and report back to, you'll see on bottom page 4, they'll report back to the Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Interim Committee to specify an appropriation amount. Just by operation of the timing involved, that would need to happen in the next interim probably. And so to have it to occur in the next interim, then it would be either another bill or the appropriations bill at the 2023, one would anticipate, that would be then the legislative appropriation to make the rest of the bill go into effect.
Follow up, Mr.
Co-chairman, follow up.
Okay, thank you, Heather, for that explanation. I was just trying to figure out what we were looking at for this coming budget session, which I felt was kind of too quick to try to get all of this done in that period of time. So, okay. Now, we talk about at an appraised value. Would there be any benefit to determining the appraisal basis? I mean, what I don't want to do is get the military department saying this is grazing land and Office of State Land saying, no, it's light industrial. So would there be any benefit to saying at an appraised value for the current usage of the land or something like that?
Mr. Chairman, it seems as though specifying that I believe you're talking about on page 4, section 3.
Correct.
Around line 16, it seems as though if the committee wanted to specify some uses that could make sense with this.
So, Mr. Co-chairman, good point. I'm inclined, committee, to have Heather walk us through the second bill and
Mr. Chairman,
go
I
ahead.
do have a follow-up. Sorry, I was distracted there for a minute. So
I saw you on your phone. I thought you were leaving the building or something.
no, almost. So Heather, maybe not a question for you. I see Mr. Crowder in the room. He may get asked this one. Looking at the map, section 36 at one time would have been completely a state section. When the sections were divvied up in 1890, I don't think they envisioned having the town of Evansville there or the veteran cemetery or anything else. At some point in the past, let's call it the southwest half of section 36 and then the northeast quarter were transferred out from the state. One went to the veteran cemetery, the other one went to build the town of Evanston. So really, I guess where I'm going is that transfer of that land already occurred at some point in the past. And was carved out for those particular purposes. I don't know I'm not sure what I'm asking now, other than it looks like we've already done this with section 36, at least once in the past, maybe twice. Do you have any recollection, or Mr. Crowder, on those transfers when that occurred or how they were done? I'm just curious. If not, that's an acceptable answer.
We can sure get, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Why don't we
can
look
sure-
for that
we can
answer
sure
and
Get to
just,
Mr. Crowder.
you can
and-
send it to the committee. That's fine.
We're
We
going
don't
to go
need
to the military
there.
department as well to visit about both of these bills. But committee, any further questions on 0033? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking at the map and we've outlined, I think it says 115 acres to give us a border there, to give us a buffer. Right now, we have a buffer because from there to the line, to the section line, there's nothing there. And there's nothing north of us either. In fact, there's nothing around us at all. Is the thinking that there might be some activity on the west side over there toward the section line that we don't want to have that close? I've not heard of any kind of activity that would be there. I like the whole thing being a buffer zone. But anyway.
Well, I think, Senator, that's a good question. There's already a pretty substantial buffer. I think in our conversation earlier in the interim, we talked about, wouldn't it be nice to assure ourselves that we're not going to end up with any big industrial project, noisy, whatever, in that section that you just referred to. And so I think that's what prompted this particular bill. And that's the policy question is, how do we want to proceed with it? But any further questions regarding this bill?
Mr. Chairman,
Let's go to Mr. Smith. Please take it away.
Chris Smith, the Senior Legal Counsel for the Wyoming Military Department. Just to clarify a couple of things that may or may not help. As we talked about in the previous meetings, the buffer zone in this bill is on that section we were just talking about is 266 acres. We originally were looking for about 115, but this bill is in conversations with OSLI. They wanted to give us the remainder of that section because splitting it up further is a management problem, as you can imagine. The second thing, just to remind the committee of previous testimony in previous hearings, the genesis for the desire for the buffer zone is the establishment of that roadway from south of the cemetery to I think of it as the north, to the left on the map, to give the town that second exit point that was a problem with the railway and the main entry into the town. So because that town was developed, it became a concern on down the road, would there be further development on that side of the river near the cemetery, just to remind the committee. The last thing I wanted to mention, Mr. Chairman, if I may, my understanding of the 2007 bill was that was an appropriation from that budget reserve account, which I understand doesn't exist anymore. It was an actual appropriation for the purchase of those properties. The money was transferred to OSLI. OSLI then, as their normal process, divvied it up depending on the school foundation fund got its amount, whatever that land was, and the rest of it went into the general fund. So it was an appropriation for purchase in '07. It went to OSLI, who did what they normally do. And I'm sure Mr. Crowder can talk about the process. And it was divided up because some of the land in that '07 bill was school section property and some was just general state land. So they kind of moved it, but it actually was a purchase from one account into those two other accounts.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I appreciate that. Committee, any questions for Mr. Smith or others? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm confused now. I think I heard the speaker say it was 266 acres now, but I'm looking at section 2 on line 6, says there's another approximately 20 acres there. So in total, are we talking about 280 some acres?
And Senator, are you referring to that northeast rectangle up there that is northeast of our cemetery?
I'm referring to northwest 1/4 of section 31, township
Okay.
34, north range 78. You want
There you
any
go.
more specifics?
The big one, referring to the big one. Okay.
And Mr. Chairman, in answer to Senator Anderson's question, I kind of misspoke. So the fund of legal descriptions, right? So the first legal description of 266 acres excludes out the 115 acres in the northeast quarter, which is the existing cemetery. The second parcel in small I2 on line 6 is that little square in the next section over in the north east corner, which is a separate piece of state land. So it is two separate parcels. When you add them both together, yeah, it totals, I don't do public math, but it totals some little less than 200 acres, excluding the 115 acres, which is the existing cemetery property.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Anderson.
follow up. So the parcel we're talking about is that one in blue on the right-hand side there off the section 36, actually.
Mr. Chairman, Senator
Go ahead,
Anderson,
Mr.
that's
Smith.
my understanding.
So, committee, I think hopefully state lands can help us clarify some more things as we get into discussion on the bill further. I'm inclined to move to the second bill and get on with the description so that we can work both these bills at the same time. Any further questions on this one before we let Heather walk us through the second bill? Okay, Heather, take it away on the second bill. And then we will go to our agencies and go to the public on these two bills, and we will work them. So go ahead, Heather.
Mr. Chairman, this is 22 LSO 0049, working draft 0.5. This bill draft focuses on veterans facilities, plural, and specifying that grazing shall be the use as around which they're surrounded, or around by which they're surrounded. So this bill draft authorizes the State Board of Land Commissioners to lease state land surrounding specified veterans facilities, and the two facilities are this State Veterans Cemetery and the facility that has the skilled nursing center and the veterans home up in Buffalo. So to lease the lands for grazing only and restructuring the dispositions of the lands that is specified. So this bill draft goes into 36-5-106. Title 36 is the section of the statutes that is state lands. So, and this is an existing statute that already, you'll see on page 2, what exists in the statute already was something called Richard Bridge Historical Park, which is actually here nearby, right here in town, I believe. Some of the folks may be familiar with it here in town, but so the existing statute you'll see is now subsection A, starting on line 5. But what that did that already exists and is the only change made to the existing was that it is turned into a subsection A. It restricted the use of some land that the State Board of Land Commissioners is authorized to lease. So then what this bill draft does is it creates a subsection B and a subsection C, saying that the State Board of Land Commissioners is, it's using just some of the same language, authorized and empowered after investigation and study, the board deems it to the best interest of the state of Wyoming to enter into a lease agreement for the portions of land belonging to the state of Wyoming. And now this is the same description. I'm not going to read the whole northwest quarter of the northwest quarter. But this is the same description that you were just looking at of these lands that are on your map around the Veterans Cemetery. But now I'm going to skip down on page 3 to the end of that of legal description to show you, starting at line 14, that the state lands described in this subsection shall not be otherwise disposed of, and any lease authorized herein shall contain a clause restricting the use of the lease of the leased property to grazing purposes, so long as the Oregon Trail State Veterans Cemetery exists in the adjacent location. So that it says, so the state lands, the subsection B says the Board of Land Commissioners can enter a lease, but only for grazing around the state cemetery. Then you look at subsection C, which begins at the bottom of page 3, and it says that the State Board of Land Commissioners is hereby authorized, and then there's the legal description of the land that surrounds the veterans facilities in Buffalo. And that's that legal description there on the top of page 4. And then there's a very similar sentence starting at line 12 on page 4, that those state lands that surround the facilities in Buffalo shall not be otherwise disposed of, and any lease shall be only for grazing, so long as the Veterans Home of Wyoming and the Veterans Skilled Nursing Facility exist in that adjacent location. That is that bill draft. So it basically says if that the Board of Land Commissioners can lease these lands, but only for grazing, and can't otherwise dispose of them as long as those veterans facilities are in existence.
Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. Committee, Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why aren't we including the 19 acres in section 31 in grazing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hearn,
Heather,
I believe that we are.
while you're looking at Heather, Representative, those aforementioned acres that you just mentioned, where are we talking about?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The blue section in section 31,
Got it.
19 acres.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative O'Hearn, on page 3, on line 1, it says that one portion of the land that's around the veterans, the State Veterans Cemetery, is that long description. And then on line 11, it says, and one portion of land located and being a portion of lot 1, the northwest quarter, and there's that section 31, Township 34 North, Range 78 West. That's the description that was in paragraph 2 of the previous bill. So there, both portions are included.
Okay. Further questions, committee? Okay, Heather, thank you. Appreciate that. I think we reserve the right to come back to you if we need to. Let's go to our military department first. General, Mr. Smith, and Director Shepherd, whatever you can give us on these two bills, we would appreciate your perspective.
Mr. Chairman, one question before they start.
Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, that Richards Bridge Historical Park, is that right there at Casper, Fort Casper, or is that some other location? There's a bridge right there. I'm not sure what it's called.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, my understanding is it's the park that's just south of the river on your map. It's in Evansville.
I believe it's that land across from the subdivision. Is that right? It's east of the subdivision, Senator, I believe.
Oh,
And I'm looking down at Representative McGuire. He's shaking his head yes. So there's a little open space there and a park. Okay.
Yeah,
So-
Mr. Chairman, it's part of the same section that these bills are
okay.
talking about.
So, Mr. Smith, before your comments, we got started a little bit late this morning, and while I was spurring the horse to catch up, I failed to recognize one of our legislators at the back, and he walked out of the room when I was going to do it earlier. So Senator Bouchard is here, and appreciate you coming today, Senator. So it's good to see you. Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the military department, and I guess I'll speak for the Veterans Commission, but of course, Mr. Shepherd is perfectly capable. Really, from our perspective, we just want to protect the sanctity of the cemetery and And the issue came up about the veterans home similarly. How this committee chooses to do that by a purchase and conveyance into the military department or by some restriction on the use of these properties, we really frankly don't care. We brought the issue up about the buffer zone because we felt like as development occurs, particularly in Evansville, and then the issue of the gravel lease came up about the veterans home in Buffalo, we just want to preserve the sanctity of these veteran homes. As a veteran myself, I'm particularly interested in that because I may end up in both places at some point. So I think it's an important issue for the state to do. The how is really up to this committee. So really, Mr. Chairman, pending your questions, that's all I was going to say.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Director Shepherd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I was remiss, I did not introduce myself. I am Tim Shepard, the Executive Director for the Wyoming Veterans Commission. Really, what Chris said is spot on. I guess I'll go back historically, my experience specifically with training lands from the military side of it is it often seemed that you would have an area where you thought, nothing will ever happen here. This is just so remote. Nobody's ever going to use this. No one will ever want to. And then 5-10 years later, you now have a neighbor and you have to deal with that issue. And so, I just would go back to the basic premise here that this is a pristine area and that we really do want to maintain it. And if we want to do that, we need to do something. How we do that, again, I agree with Mr. Smith. That's up to the committee. The simpler of the two from my standpoint is the grazing, to just do that, but obviously it's up to the committee.
Well stated, Director. Thank you. Any questions specifically for these gentlemen? We'll let them take a seat a little further back and we'll see if we can call forward our state lands agency. Mr. Crowder, good to see you. Thanks for being here. We know who you are, but please state your name for the record and give us your perspective on these two bills. That would
Thank you,
be
Mr.
much
Chairman.
appreciated.
Absolutely. My name is Jason Crowder. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. I want to send along Director Scoggins' regrets for not being here. We have a board meeting coming up on Thursday, and she's spending all day today with each one of the board members, getting them ready for that meeting. Otherwise, she would be here. So I apologize. You have the B team yet again today.
She could have spent all day with us. I mean,
That's true. She does not know what she's missing.
that's exactly right. She really doesn't. All right.
She will eventually.
Yeah, there you go.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what order you'd like me to start in. These are very complex topics from my perspective. It appears the committee has reduced them to a very easy to understand set of a couple bills, but I'm happy to start in any manner you'd like.
Let's take up 33, which is the cemetery buffer zone. A lot of legal description in that bill. I think we all on the committee are pretty aware of what part of the world we're looking at there, but Mr. Crowder, what's the perspective of state lands with regard to giving that to the military and just protecting all the rest of that land up there?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think I might start that discussion with a description of what's on the map. The map that was provided to you in hard copy today is an exact replica of what the military department provided. I just thought I'd blow it up a little bit so that I could see it and possibly you could see it as well. But obviously we're talking about a section 36 that's right in the town of Evansville, or right north of the town of Evansville. You'll notice on the very northeast corner of that parcel, that is what has been previously transferred to the Department of Military Affairs for the Veteran Cemetery. The yellow buffer is what was discussed at the last meeting, so it's just there for visual representation. And that's roughly 115 acres around the outside boundary of what they currently own. Everything in the crosshatched is currently school trust land. It is a Section 36 that's dedicated for the Common School Fund. That does have a grazing lease on it as well. Just one grazing lease to Mr. William Widmer. It currently has 49 AUMs, so it's a very low producing parcel when we compare it to the rest of the state, and it only generates $271 in AUM, or $271 per year. Now that's based on the Board of Land Commissioners minimum rate of $5.38 per AUM. There's no reason to increase that rate. We've had no conflicting bids, so that's what we expect to garner into the future. That one lease will expire in the year 2030. Section 31, which is in the very right side of your map, that is only a little over 19 acres. It is only owned, the surface is only owned by the board. The subsurface is not. And there's no grazing lease on that parcel right now. So the only use that we have we've generated revenue from are the couple of easements on that property. Surrounding ownership of that is by Sinclair Refining. There was a question at the last meeting, where does the BLM own? The federal government owns no land around this parcel. Everything you see in blue is owned by the state, managed by the Board of Land Commissioners, and everything that doesn't have a color is privately held land. There are no active mineral leases on the property. The property, both parcels actually were annexed into the town of Evansville on October 15th, 1981. And that was an action that was initiated by the Office of State Lands and approved by the Board of Land Commissioners. And I believe the intent in 1981 was that we were going to develop this parcel for residential development. And as was stated at the last meeting, it is currently zoned by the town as R1, which means single family residence. There is a little portion in the very area that's close to the river that's zoned for public use, and I would imagine that they intend to extend Rishaw Park up into that area. But I can only imagine that back in the 80s, our office saw that as a development opportunity, approached the town to annex it so that we could have a better opportunity and garner more revenue from that development at that time. It is currently annexed as well. That has not gone away, and we don't see that going away into the future. One of the questions that was brought up just recently was, how many acres are we talking about? The full parcel, both Section 36 and 31 together, is 285.97 acres. So that would be the complete parcel. We've done a preliminary value assessment on this. It's extremely difficult to hit this mark. As you can see, it is riddled with pink lines. Each one of those pink lines is an easement of some kind. It's either a pipeline, an overhead power line, or a road. There are 21 separate easements on this property that, as I stated before, really spiderweb this and reduce its ability to do much more than generate revenue from a grazing perspective. So that's why we've identified it as a potential sale opportunity. We can't do much more with it than what is currently there. Obviously, when we issue an easement, or when the Board of Land Commissioners approves an easement, it approves it at a consideration rate, which is basically a sale of that portion of the property. While we don't give away all of the fee simple rights, we basically do charge for them. So we've sold each segment of that over time incrementally at the then market rate. And when we go to appraise this property going forward, if this bill moves forward, we would have to understand that each one of those encumbrances may have a negative impact on the value. Which is why we believe we've gotten all of the good out of it that we can. And the next thing to do is just remove it from the books, as it was stated earlier, and sell it for its highest and best use at an appraised value. Our appraisers did look at it. They bracketed the value anywhere between $4,000 and $8,000 an acre. Now, I am not a USPAP certified appraiser, so I use those numbers very loosely. And we would want to do an appraisal to understand what the exact value is. But the development potential, based on its proximity to Casper and Evansville, it's being annexed into the town of Evansville, and all of its easements that currently encumber the property are all going to have an effect to hit that value somewhere in that bracket. For large real numbers, that's anywhere from $1 million to just over $2 million for the value of this property, as we generally understand it. Mr. Chairman, we are talking about a direct sale. We're talking about a direct transfer of ownership from the Board of Land Commissioners to the military department. And that is something that is not allowable per the Constitution. The Constitution states that every parcel of state land that were granted to the state be sold at public auction, and it be sold to garner its maximum value. We've gotten around that through legislative authorization. And as LSO stated earlier, that has happened with other state agencies in the past. We've discussed doing that with private entities. We've, to my knowledge, not been successful in that, largely because I don't believe that is anything that's palatable to the legislature, that you're supporting a private individual that may not be constitutional as well. So we've really only discussed it in the terms of governmental entities, but the Constitution does not say only governmental entities can go around this by legislative authorization. It's really everybody. But we've used it with other state entities. We've also used it with Teton National Park when we were selling the Antelope Flats parcel and the rest of the parcels within that park. So that's where we've used that authorization, and that's really what we would seek here, because we don't believe the military department would like to compete in a public auction. And without that authorization, they would have to compete at that public auction. There was some discussion about how money was used or deposited from the sale of those previous parcels to state parks and the Game and Fish Department. I think that Mr. Smith did a great job of explaining that these lands are held in trust for a specific purpose, and the Constitution clearly defines what that specific purpose is. So it's not necessarily a state entity paying or a state paying the state, and it's a crazy accounting function. It's actual deposit into the permanent land fund. And that's what we did with those parcels. And if this bill were to move forward and we receive funds from appropriation, that's what we would do is support the permanent land for the benefit of the common school system with that sale. We use an appraisal process in almost every transaction that we do. And I say a transaction loosely, that's lease rates and things like that. We don't appraise every single one of those, but every single real estate transaction, we do use an appraisal. We do go by the state certified USPAP standards. We do expect state certified appraisers to conduct that work, and we do give them instructions. And they have a lot of instructions that come through to them from the certified board and as part of being a certified appraiser. So they have to appraise property in a certain way. And one of those ways is pursuant to its highest and best use. And that's an instruction that we give to each appraiser that appraises state land, is to determine what's the highest and best use for that property. And we put a few hypothetical instructions in there. We always tell them they have to appraise it as if it's private land. They can't have a discount for it to be government land. We expect them to appraise it as if it has public access, even if the property doesn't. But we don't go so far as to tell the appraiser to appraise as if it can only be used in a certain manner. We've tried that in the past, and the appraisers say that they can't give us a certified report with that kind of restriction on it. So we allow them to determine what the highest and best use is and to define what the comparables would be to help support what that value might be. And we expect to do the same thing here. We did do that in all of the previous transactions to sister agencies. We garnered a USPAP certified appraisal in each one of those instances and use that value for the appropriation from the legislature. And Mr. Chairman, there was a question earlier about what happened to the southwest corner, I believe from the co-chair. And I don't have any information about that, when it happened or how it happened. And I'm happy to find that information for you. We've got that in the office, just haven't done that analysis yet.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Crowder, don't put a lot of effort into that. That was a curiosity question. If you find the answer, I'd appreciate it, but please don't spend a lot of time on that. Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
And then, Mr. Chairman, my last note here indicates that to describe the management plan of this parcel. Obviously, I think I've done that a little bit, and that's we try to get the optimal benefit out of these parcels. This is a revenue generating function for the state of Wyoming, specifically to the beneficiaries that are tied to each one of these parcels. So we want each asset to perform at its optimal level. This parcel obviously has been utilized heavily by a lot of different industries around it, adjacent to it, evidenced by all of the easements there. We feel like there's no other greater use of this property than to sell it. And it has been on the list. It's an internal list. It's not an external list, but it's something that we've identified when we have time and effort, we can place 2 parcels. This is one that we would probably suggest to the Board of Land Commissioners that they initiate a sale, be it to the military department or anybody else. But we've developed it as much as we can, we feel, short of a grazing lease that only garners $271 a year. It's not living up to its optimal potential any longer. Our office generates close to $200 million a year from the use of these lands. That's dropped significantly with the oil and gas prices going down and coal going away, but we need to find other mechanisms to generate revenue. This parcel is one that we feel like we can remove it from the books, utilize the funds out of it, go acquire new lands that could generate more revenue in a different way than oil and gas currently provides. Mr. Chairman, I believe that's everything I have to say for section 36 in Evansville.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Crowder, what you're saying is it's your position to, in effect, dispose of somehow all the remaining state land in section 36. Am I correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's been identified, yes.
Okay, thank you. Follow up, Mr. Chairman. So if the bill establishes this buffer zone that is in this yellowish color on the map, if you do only that, does that make the remaining state portions of that section less valuable?
Mr. Chairman, obviously, we would further pursue selling the rest of the parcel because it's lost a lot of value to us. And the more you decrease the amount of acreage available for sale, you'll reduce its value, obviously. But you start decreasing the amount of opportunities for development as well, which could further decrease its value.
Follow?
No, I'm good.
Committee, questions? I've got a couple. Mr. Crowder, can you clarify for me the shaded land that was just aforementioned by the co-chairman, which in effect creates that buffer, especially to the south, because we already have that west buffer and the north buffer to our cemetery. And really, when we worked so hard to put that road through and work cooperatively with the military, we kind of pledged to go along the same line of thinking that north of that new road between there and the cemetery, that's a concern to us. So that shaded area, can you clarify for me, what is that? Currently, is that an agreement that we're not going to do anything with that? Or go back over that for me, if you would, please.
Mr. Chairman, the shaded area in yellow is simply illustrative for what we understood the original buffer to be. Roughly 100 acres outside of the fenced-in boundary of what's owned by the vet cemetery. The road, as discussed, is within those pink lines. So it doesn't go all the way down to the river. It sits above the floodplain or the cliff there, I guess, if you'll call it that. So it's very close to the line anyway, and the buffer really exceeds where the road is. So you're not buffering between the road and the fence line completely. You're doing a lot more than that. The topography there is steep and the development potential is probably small, but it's free and unencumbered at the moment. And there's no private agreement. There's no shake hand agreement at the moment. There's nothing. It's available as any other piece of state trust land is for development.
So that begs the question then, Mr. Crowder, if we're concerned and we want that shaded area to be the buffer to end all time, how do we do that if we don't specify in a bill like this? Because right now, the state land board could turn around and put that all up for auction and it could sell tomorrow, hypothetically. And we could lose that buffer to the south of our cemetery. Isn't that correct?
Mr. Chairman, the black and white of it, that is correct. It's also important to note that the Board of Land Commissioners are the top 5 elected officials, and they're influenced by everybody who talks to them. And so they'd understand the situation from us and from those they sought comment from in their meetings as well.
We trust, but we verify. I think we understand, each other. I think you understand where the committee's coming from. Our concern is, we just don't want the eventuality of development up next to our cemetery. That's the bottom line. So, further questions? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it appropriate to move on to the veterans home up in Buffalo, or
If we are, let's finish up any questions we have on 33, and then we'll have Mr. Crowder cover the next bill, if that's all right, Representative. Okay. Come on back and you can have the microphone.
Thank you.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crowder, so if the remaining state land was transferred to the military department, then it becomes in effect theirs to do what they wish with. So I'm looking at the southeast little triangle down there that goes down to the river. And while there are a few easements on there, I look at that as potentially the military department would then be able to say, sell that as a residential area, if that was the wish of the military department. I'm not saying they would, but I can see that as having river frontage as being a desirable place to maybe build a house or something like that. But that would be their option.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, that's correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Crowder, let's move on, and any thoughts you have, because we're running behind this morning, let's keep going. Interested in your perspective on 0049, veterans facilities surrounded by grazing. That involves both facilities in Buffalo and in Evansville. So take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I provided the committee with a report, as was requested at the last meeting, about how the lands around the veterans home were acquired by the state of Wyoming and how we currently manage them. And I hope you all have a copy of that.
Mr. Chairman, you will find that that copy is behind the colored page number 4 for the military and veterans reports and updates, anticipating that this topic might also be discussed with the veteran skilled nursing facility progress. But if folks are looking for it, that's where you'll find it.
And what I'd like to do is just kind of describe how we develop the report so you can understand it a little bit better. It's rather thick for one parcel of state land. Just highlight section or page 9 of that report. Each one of these sections were split up based on its section, where it lies within the township, and each one of those tracks were described. And this is typically how we do a title. It's not necessarily a title opinion, but a title explanation as we fully understand them. So you're going to find a lot of redundant information through this, but it specifically talks about each and every section and each and every tract within those parcels. Page 33 begins the maps of what we're talking about. So specifically to the discussion that we're going to have, track number 3 within section 4 is largely where the veteran home sits. And so when you refer back earlier in the report, you'll find track 3, and that'll have a lot of discussion. Going to page 34. Yep.
Just real quick for clarification, in tract 3, approximately where does the veterans home sit? Just middle or?
Yeah, Mr. Co-Chair, it's along the western edge. It's somewhat visible in the aerial photo there.
That kind of lighter area right there?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So the committee had asked our office to do a report to understand how this parcel came into ownership by the state of Wyoming, how it's progressed through time and where it currently sits. And this is a very cloudy situation to try to clarify. And so I apologize. I'm gonna be expedient of time as much as I can, but try to provide the committee with the color needed to ensure that you have an understanding of how this parcel came into being. These lands were acquired by the state of Wyoming through the act of admission. The federal government identified 260,000 acres of land that were supposed to be for the specific purpose of establishment, maintenance, and support of charitable, educational, penal, and reformatory institutions. These parcels were part of that designation. The legislature went further in 1899 and determined that 30,000 of those 260,000 acres were to benefit the Soldiers and Sailors Home. And when we say benefit, we mean benefit in a monetary nature, not to place buildings on them or anything, but the revenue derived from those parcels were to benefit soldiers and sailors, just as if it were a common school piece of property. So we've designated it within our office as SS. That means nothing to you, but it means everything to us. It is a beneficiary code. So all the revenue derived from SS lands, all 30,000 acres, are directly identified and tagged for the legislature's appropriation specific to the Soldiers and Sailors Home. The Soldiers and Sailors Home has been renamed into the Vets Home, but they're one and the same. Later,
So, Mr. Crowder, let me interrupt real quickly on that point, because if the language refers to a benefit to those properties, does that necessarily mean monetary? Is that case law, or is that just an interpretation by the agency today?
Mr. Chairman, it's not an interpretation, and I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to represent as if I am one. But the Constitution specifically says the benefit is the monetary value from the sale or rental from those lands.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. In 1903, the legislature further described or established the Vets Home to be placed on 1,280 acres, roughly close to the city of Buffalo. And what they intended was the old Fort McKinney military reservation, and that's where it currently sits today. But the legislature determined that that property will be set on those parcels of state trust land. They were trust land at that time, and under the direction of the Board of Charities and Reform. The Board of Charities and Reform is the same 5 statewide elected officials as the Board of Land Commissioners. The Board of Charities and Reform was in charge of all 260,000 acres of the SCEP&R lands, so the state charitable, educational, penal, and reformatory lands. Those 2 bodies, being the exact same makeup and form, really did their work as one. So anytime they dealt with a parcel of land that was SCEP&R, they treated it as if it was any other parcel of state land, and they kind of did their work congruently. They didn't dissolve themselves out of the Board of Land Commissioners and reform themselves as the Board of Charities and Reform. They just went forward, and one action constituted approval by both boards. In 1990, the state of Wyoming went through a reorganization of government, and the Board of Charities and Reforms was dissolved. And all the lands that were held under the Board of Charities and Reform went under the jurisdiction solely of the Board of Land Commissioners, with the exception of the Vets Home. That and a few others, but specific to this discussion, the Vets Home was identified as going under the ownership and management of the Department of Health. Now, the Department of Health, to my knowledge, doesn't have a lot of track record or experience in managing land. So I believe, and I wasn't there in the 90s, but I believe the normal course of business continued, even though the change of ownership and management occurred at that point, that the Board of Land Commissioners still managed those lands on behalf of the Department of Health and with the fund code of SS on this particular parcel. So funds derived were still going to the Soldiers and Sailors Beneficiary Code.
So, Mr. Crowder, just anything you can do to expedite.
Getting close to the
clock is moving on. So go ahead. Thank you.
So at that point, the Board of Charities and Reform was dissolved. Board of Land Commissioners maintained its authority as it does for other state agencies. And then in 2013, the legislature further directed the Board of Land Commissioners to have management authority over acquired institutional lands for those lands not directly held or utilized for departmental purposes. So at that point, these lands were clearly defined as acquired institutional lands. All of the lands outside of the campus were defined within a report that was provided to the legislature legislature as those lands not directly utilized for departmental purposes. Thus, they remained under and more clearly under the jurisdiction of the Board of Land Commissioners. Now, that report also gave us, or that legislation in 2013, clear guidelines on how to manage these lands for the specific institutions. And it is to do so in consultation with the department, in consideration of the needs of the institution, in consideration of alternate uses of the property that are compatible with the mission of the institution, any limitations contained in the Constitution of the state, the federal law, or any conveyance instrument, and to seek guidance of any governing body having regulatory authority over those acquired institutional lands. And so that is the transition that happened in 2013. Board still maintains its jurisdiction.
Was that legislated?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Session Laws of 2013, Chapter 154.
Thank you.
At that time, it also created accounts that changed the soldiers and sailors beneficiary designation to now what we call DH internally, or the Department of Health. So any funds received from those lands go into that DH revenue code, and the legislature can appropriate out of that. We maintain that we operate these acquired institutional lands as if they were trust lands, subject to the provisions within the legislature, but the Department of Health has become our beneficiary instead of the vet's home at this point. And that's how we've managed it from 2013 up until today. And the gray area, and why I believe we had a little bit of a conflict with this, is that our records didn't follow through the last 133 years to clearly designate which parcel and which fund code these should have been tied to. This should have been changed from SS to DH internally. That shift never happened, and so it didn't kick off the process for our program managers internally to notify everybody of the sand and gravel lease that was occurring. That being said, the Board of Land Commissioners maintains the authority to have that sand and gravel lease. We just needed to have more outreach to ensure that it was going to occur there. The reason I say that the Board of Land Commissioners was likely going to approve a sand and gravel lease on this parcel regardless is that it is in the very northeast corner of the parcel. It's up and above the hill from the veterans home. It's probably not in any view shed of anybody lying in the beds there, as I've heard stated, and that it likely didn't have much of an impact to the institutional needs, and they would have moved forward with approval of that anyway. We've been placed in a very hard spot managing these lands on the part of these institutions, and we've had to make some tough calls, and they haven't been popular calls, but we've tried to live within the law, the letter of the law, and do what the intent of the legislature would like us to do. Mr. Chairman, that is a description of the report. What I'd like to do, if I just 2 more seconds, is that these two parcels are completely different in the light of the draft bills. The parcel by Evansville is a Section 36 solely dedicated for the Common School Fund. The parcel by the Veterans Home is acquired institutional land that is under the guidance of the session laws in 2013. Managing them in the same manner is, we feel, problematic because we may not be complying with the constitutional intention for how beneficiary lands are to be managed and how state acquired lands are to be managed. It would be much easier to place a restriction as dictated or as noted within the draft bills on acquired institutional lands than it would be on common school lands.
Okay, thank you for that perspective, Mr. Crowder. Any questions, committee? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I read all 44 pages of the report. And my question is, how in the world of common sense would anybody sign a sand and gravel lease on the same piece of property where we have our veterans home? Even if you say that they won't be able to see it, they can certainly hear it from the veterans home. Who is in charge and who made that decision?
Mr. Crowder.
Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned before, we didn't follow the process as we should have. We are completely apologetic for that and have changed all of our records to ensure that this moves forward in an appropriate way. The Board of Land Commissioners holds the sole responsibility for making those decisions, and obviously we recommend what decisions we feel are most appropriate based on the guiding documents, the legislation, and statutes.
Follow up? Thank you, Representative. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, maybe that's why the executive director is not here today to answer that question from Representative McGuire. Maybe she could answer that question in a memo to us or something.
Thank you. We can sure make that suggestion. So Mr. Crowder, I think you can tell that the committee is very concerned about that kind of thing. And we're very concerned about protecting these two institutions. Appreciate your perspective and the fact that we may be a little bit at odds here. But we'll work these bills after we hear from the public and reserve the right to come back to you with any questions. Really appreciate you being here, Mr. Crowder. Thanks. And
I do have a question.
go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman. Then we're going to move on here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Crowder, this sand and gravel lease, how long is the lease in place for?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, it'll expire in June of 2023.
Right, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, follow up to that. Can that lease be rescinded prior to that date? Is there a clause in there that lets the state rescind that lease?
Mr. Crowder?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know of just a blanket, the board can revoke something that it approved without some cause. I can go back and review the lease language, but I'm not at the top of my head aware of one of those.
All right, Mr. Chairman, kind of a follow-up, maybe for our military department. Just a quick question. What is the anticipated completion date of the skilled nursing facility?
Director Shepherd, can you come forward real quickly just so that we're on the record with that? Just a curiosity of when we're kind of looking at finishing up there.
Thank you, Chairman. It's July of 22.
Thank
you. So Mr. Shepherd, we're probably looking at residents being on board by the first part of 23 then, right?
I think that's reasonable, Chairman.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything else, committee? Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, the co-chairman's question didn't get answered. His question was, how long has it been in effect? Not when is it going to expire, but how long has that lease been in effect? Was that leased while we were making the law about putting that facility up there, or has that been in effect for 10 years or so? When did that lease begin?
Yeah, I think, Senator, I think that the question was on how long it would last, but that's a good question on the front end. Mr. Crowder, when did we go into that lease up there, enter into it?
Mr. Chairman, based on my memory, I believe it's only been renewed one time. So it's been in existence for 3 years or just over 2 years. I'm not sure, Mr. Chairman, when you worked on the legislation for the skilled nursing facility.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So kind of a follow-up to all of that, Mr. Crowder, is there any, call it hold on that sand and gravel lease that it will not be renewed? Is there any directive sitting on it that says, don't renew this?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair, there is not currently. The only stop gap or gate in front of it is to make sure that we comply with the session laws of 2013 and approach the institution and governing bodies to seek their comments.
So just for clarification, Mr. Crowder, when our agency makes that recommendation, is that a line item that is approved by the SLID board then? Or does it reach that high of a level when we're entering into leases?
Mr. Chairman, yes, all leases are approved or disapproved or considered at least by the Board of Land Commissioners.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anything else, committee? I want to get to public comment real quick. And we may take a quick break before we work these bills, but I want to go to public comment. Thank you, Mr. Crowder. Appreciate you being here today. Is there anybody in the room that would like to comment on either one of these bills that we are considering? And after we work these bills, we will come to public comment in general on everything that took place this morning from our military department, everything discussed. one more time, any public comment on either one of these bills? Do we have, Heather, anybody online that wants to comment? Okay, thank you very much. I'll close public comment on these bills. Regarding draft 033 committee, what's your pleasure? Moved by Representative Henderson. Do I have a second? Seconded by Senator Pappas. Discussion. Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, we're considering two bills here this morning, and first one being 33 transfers ownership of the land, whereas the second one just sets aside the grazing in the area. So I like the second one better, that we don't have to transfer any land or have any sales or any of that kind of stuff. So I'll be a no on 33. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would echo that insofar as also just last session, I believe that we dealt with issues with regard to grazing and other things. The military department, their job is to move people around and protect us and keep us safe. And, you know, writing a lease for $285 a year and monitoring that piece of property and making sure it's not overgrazed and things, that's just not their job. I mean, that's why we have the state land board. I would be advocating strongly in favor of 0049. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Anything further, committee? Anything further? Okay, let's stick with protocol and work the bill real quickly. Are there any amendments on page 1 through 5 on 0033? Pages 1 through 5. Any proposed amendments to the bill? I'll give everyone just a moment to consider. I wasn't going to go page by page because I get kind of where this one might be headed, but okay. Are you ready for the question on the bill? Okay, Heather, would you please call roll on LSO 0033, please?
Senator Anderson? No. Senator Furphy?
No.
Senator McEwen?
No.
Senator Pappas?
Aye.
Representative Baker?
No.
Representative Brown?
Excused.
Representative Burt?
Excused.
Representative Henderson?
Aye.
Representative McGuire?
No.
Representative Obermueller?
No.
Representative O'Hearn?
No.
Representative Stivar?
Excused.
Co-Chairman Burkhart?
No.
Co-Chairman Landon?
No. Okay,
2 ayes.
2 ayes. Thank you. That 0033 will not be carried forward by the Transportation Military Affairs Committee. That is not to say that similar type legislation might not be offered by individual senators or representatives. Let's set that one aside. Committee, let's go to 0049, Veterans Facilities Surrounded by Grazing. Discussion. Oh, let's, Representative McGuire has moved. Do I have a second on the bill? Seconded by Senator Anderson. Now we can have discussion. Any thoughts on this bill? Okay, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be offering 2 amendments to it, but I would strongly advocate for this bill insofar as the legislature, we have several duties. One of them is setting policy, which clearly this is a policy question. And the second thing is when the legislature set forward the enabling legislation for the state land board, they reserved unto themselves the opportunity to dictate how some pieces of property will be administered. And I think that we have a grand opportunity here to set forth how we want these lands to be handled. And clearly there's a threat. I mean, we have a city, a small town or city, I can't remember which it is right now, right next to it that clearly would like to grow in that direction. We have other developers, that portion of town is developing. The same thing with the veterans home. It's our job to set the policy and, in my opinion, to protect the sanctity of those two sites. And currently they're being used for grazing, so we can continue that. There's still revenue coming in and move forward for our children to make sure that those pieces of property are as nice now for them as they are for us today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Any further comment? Okay, let's work this bill, committee. Let's go to page 1. Are there any proposed amendments on page 1? Okay, page 2. Page 2 on 0049. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you would go to the lower portion of page number 2, starting with line number 20. And delete the following. So after the word empowered, comma, and delete if after investigation and study, the board deems it to the best interest of the state of Wyoming. Delete that line, and as explanation, it would be, so this is not going to be discretionary legislation. This is going to be telling it how it's going to be. Doesn't need to be any studies or anything else. It's going to be how we say it is. And if somebody wants to have a change later on, there can be a proposal to change the legislation that will go through, and 90 people will have an opportunity to weigh in on. So that would be my first, if it makes it simpler, so on the next section on page 3, there's similar language, and at the appropriate time, I'll take it out of that particular paragraph also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative McGuire. I think we could make that conforming and carry over onto page 3 with similar amendment. But I'm looking over at Heather squared.
Mr.
So-
Chairman, as you wish, I've got it marked for both. It could be the same.
Okay, thank you.
Amendment.
So we'll treat that as conforming committee. Does that make sense to everyone? And Heather, do you have that amendment then? Once again.
Yes,
on-
Mr. Chairman.
On line
I've
20
documented it.
committee, beginning with the word if and carrying all the way down through line 22 through Wyoming and comma.
And Mr. Chairman, I believe the first comma is included as well.
That's correct. Thank you. Representative Henderson.
Just for clarification, who's second?
We did. Thank you, Representative O'Hearn, and thank you, Representative Henderson, for that. Committee, any further discussion on the proposed amendment? Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question on the fact that we're sitting in a section 36 and whether we have just want to revisit the issue of highest and best use. And whether eliminating that language puts us at odds there in a constitutional sense, and we might lose this bill in time over that issue. Even if we passed it, just ask for some feedback on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you look at the enabling language for the Board of Land Commissioners, it's 36.2.101, where the legislature established the Board of Land Commissioners, gave the board certain direction, and goes on to say, whatsoever subject to the limitations contained in the Constitution and laws enacted by the legislature. So clearly the legislature held back the authority to dictate how certain lands are going to be administered, and have in the past. There's clear examples and clear case law. So the legislature has the authority. And so that's, I don't think that it has to be put up for bid or consideration or anything else. The legislature can just say how it's going to be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further discussion, follow up, Representative Ogletree?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It sounds like the good representative is doing an interpretation of it rather than an actual. It just sounds like it's probably a court case in the making or something like this.
So Representative, just as a longer timer in the legislature, it's been my experience that sometimes actions by the legislature receive critique from the attorneys out there and from the constitutional scholars, et cetera, et cetera. But that shouldn't prohibit, I think, our committee from doing something that we think is important from a legislative standpoint. You know, questions over constitutionality or who might challenge whatever, I suppose that could come down the line. But to me, that's not my consideration today. My consideration today is these two properties that we've been talking about. So I don't know if that helps at all, but committee, anything further? Okay, let's vote on this proposed amendment. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, that amendment carries. Further amendments on page 2 or 3? Go ahead, Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this would be a conforming amendment also. So starting on page number 3, if you go to line number 17, and it reads restricting the use of the leased property to grazing purposes. And then I would put in, bless you.
Bless you.
Bless you. Put in the word only, comma, subject to approval by the Wyoming Adjutant General. And the reason for that is because let's say that somebody brought in some yaks or something like that that have no respect for fences. And all of a sudden they're breaking through the fence and they're grazing on the area of the cemetery. Or the same thing with the soldier or the veterans home. At that point, we need to have someone who can say, no, this just isn't working. And I think that the appropriate person is the Adjutant General. So in my opinion, that's a safety valve. If there's no problem, well, then there's no issue. But if there does become a problem, then somebody with some common sense has an opportunity to look at it and say, we need to make a change. And the conforming change would also be on page 4, line number 15. And it would say the same thing for grazing purposes only, subject to approval by the Wyoming Adjutant General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So one more time, Representative McGuire, can you track that in for me, please, just to make sure I've got it?
Okay, so
Yeah.
page number 3,
Page 3.
line number 17.
Okay.
And it would be restricting the use of the leased property to grazing purposes, and then insert the word only, comma, subject to approval by the Wyoming Adjutant General.
So only, comma, subject
To
to
approval
approval.
by the Wyoming Adjutant General.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Senator Anderson. Discussion. Senator Anderson.
That's just one place that it's in, right? He's also putting it in on page 4.
I believe, and I'm looking at Heather, I suspect that can be conforming as well. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I caught that. And Representative McGuire indicated that that's on page 4, line 15, where that will start.
Okay. Okay, committee, are we good with that? Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I understand what that does and the reasons. I guess I don't know how that fits with Office of State Lands, because in effect, it takes away their ability to manage the land and puts it right into the military department again, which we talked about on the previous bill, that we don't want them being land managers. It just kind of gives them final say. I understand the reason and the logic. I'm not sure I go along with it, though.
You know, I'm still playing that through in my mind too, Mr. Co-Chairman. I like the authority of somebody to be able to roll in and say, look, this isn't working. And I just, you know, I wonder, Mr. Crowder, would you be willing to come forward and answer a question for me? Mr. Crowder, in a situation like this, do you have the authority to end a lease or to terminate a lease? And have you ever done it?
Mr. Chairman, we have terminated a lease for cause if they are not compliant with state statute or the lease terms.
So hypothetically, Mr. Crowder, if we had a situation that was described by the representative and we had livestock that continued to break fences down and break into our facilities, would you have the ability to terminate a lease?
Mr. Chairman.
And would you?
Very difficult question. We do not define the type of animal to be grazing out there in our basic lease that we have across the state. We don't own the improvements either. We don't own the fences. Those are owned by the lessees, and we don't manage adjacent land. So if livestock are continually going off of state land onto somebody else's land, we would expect that private party, largely would be a private party, would initiate some action to stop that. I don't believe on its face that's a terminable offense in our existing lease language.
You can imagine that that's concerning to some of us. Because if it's my horses that keep breaking that fence down and going on to the cemetery property, for example, and I just never work to improve that situation, it seems to me like we would have cause for removing my animals from that property, but you're saying not really.
Mr. Chairman, the black and white of it is I don't believe so. However, we do work with our lessees on a continual basis. We have overgrazing issues. We have all sorts of issues that we manage with them. And in large part, we're successful in those efforts.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Co-Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, I think I would propose an amendment to the amendment. And that is to delete the word approval and insert the advice of the Wyoming Adjutant General. What, Mr. Chairman, what that does is it takes away the military department approving of any lease and says that they can advise on it.
Okay, moved and seconded committee by Representative Burkhart, Representative Henderson, to change out the word approval, insert the word the advice. Discussion. Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would gently push back insofar as the original language is subject to the approval. So that doesn't mean that the approval will be withheld or anything else. Subject to, so if there's an issue, then the Adjutant General can step in and say we have a problem. And at this point, we need to review the lease and maybe move forward to terminate the lease. And that would be subject to, we just heard from the State Land Board, they may not care. The livestock is breaking down fences, it's getting in on the area of the veteran cemetery, it's grazing on the grass that we pay for to water. And that's really not their concern. So again, in my opinion, we need to have someone with the military department have an overriding say. And as mentioned before, our military department is busy moving people around and protecting us. It's not going to come up unless there's an issue. If the people who are running these facilities have a problem, then they can go to the adjutant general. But other than that, it is going to be what it is right now. That would be my general pushback.
Okay, we're on the amendment to the amendment. Further discussion. Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since we have the adjutant sitting with us today, would ask you, sir, to ask him if you'd like to comment.
I think that's a great idea, Representative. General? By golly, you're up.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Henderson. If I understand the situation correctly, the bill as it's currently written will really maintain the management of grazing in OSLI. I think it would be somewhat problematic to have the adjutant general have some sort of approval over there, as the co-chairman Burkhart said. I certainly think that's there's some elegance to some discussion and concurrence. I think further on, if there was a problem based on the adjutant general's relationship with members of OSLI, the governor and the 5 electeds, I think the adjutant general could leverage that relationship if there was issues that were happening there to have them address it. So in my quick thinking about this, I'm not sure that it makes sense if the grazing and the management of the buffer zone is still under OSLI, that the military department has much of a approval authority over the top of that. But I think the adjutant general could use that position to talk with OSLI and the board if there was some problem there that we thought contributed to disturbing the sanctity of the seminary, if that makes sense, sir.
Okay. Questions of the general? Committee, we're going to vote on the amendment to the amendment. Advice, the advice, replacing the word approval. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
I think the noes have it. Raise of hands, those in favor, real quickly. Okay, 3 votes, those opposed to the amendment Okay, that amendment has failed. We're back on the amendment. Is everybody clear on that? Further discussion? Are we ready for the question on that one? All in favor of Representative McGuire's motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Okay, show of hands, please. Those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. Those opposed, raise your hand. 2, 3, and I do not see Representative Baker on the screen. Is he still with us? Has he indicated a vote?
I voted in favor of the.
In favor of, okay, that amendment passes. We're back on the bill. Further discussion. Are you ready for the question? Heather, would you please take roll on 0049, Veterans Facility surrounded by grazing?
Senator Anderson. Senator Furphy. Senator McEwen.
Aye.
Senator Pappas.
Aye.
Representative Baker.
Aye.
Representative Brown.
Excuse.
Representative Burt.
Excuse.
Representative Henderson. Representative McGuire.
Aye.
Representative Obermuller. Representative O'Hearn.
Aye.
Representative Stivar.
Excused.
Co-chairman Burkhart.
Aye.
Co-chairman Landon.
Aye.
That passed.
Right now, yeah. So that bill passes, and look forward to working with all of you gentlemen as we go forward with that. we realize there's lots of things to consider when we're looking at our state lands and our facilities out there. We- Let's, you want to start that one on the House? All right. Take it and run with it, Mr. Co-Chairman. I want to go to public comment on anything that has transpired thus far from our military department. Is there any public comment on opening remarks, updates that have been provided? Bills? Okay, and we did provide for public comment on those bills, just as a reminder, and we didn't have any. So Heather, anything, do we have anybody zooming in who would like to offer comment at this time? Okay, we're going to close public comment then, committee. We're going to take a 10-minute break, and we will come back to military and veterans report and updates, which includes Camp Guernsey, the Veterans Skill Facility, etc. So we'll be back in 10 minutes. What's that?
Better go see what the senator wanted.
What senator is that? Barrasso?
Yeah.
You are running with some big dogs, Mr. Co-Chairman.
You don't know at times.
Can we stand clear on this?
The next item on our agenda for consideration, committee, is just some military and veterans reports and some updates, specifically Camp Guernsey, the Veteran Skilled Nursing Facility, fact-finding survey results and reports addressing sexual harassment and sexual assault. And we will get to all of those in this next segment, but I did want to say we are going to have a hard stop at 11:45. So folks in the public, folks in the room, and ladies and gentlemen here, committee, we're going to stop at 11:45, and then we will come back in for the afternoon at 1:15. There are legislators who have a couple of things they need to get taken care of. And so we need that hard stop at 11:45. So wherever we are, we'll pick it up right after lunch. We are back to you, General. Take it away.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Given those instructions, I'll try to be brief here, but please obviously ask any questions that you have. I'm on slide 11, which is the Camp Guernsey grazing update. And if the committee recalls, what this is some legislation that was executed last year that moved the management of grazing out of the federal portion of the military department to a contractor, to a state contractor. And that was based on some executive orders that had come out saying that we could no longer manage grazing through the federal process. If you recall the debate, there's a little bit more to that. Really, very quick update. We have a contractor hired, is on site that assumed the responsibility at the start of the fiscal year on the 1st of October. Really have no expenditures or anything like that yet to report, sir. They're starting to do that work. Probably there'll be a more detailed report at the end of this fiscal year. But contracts executed. We have people on board, and we're executing the intent of the legislation. And I think we're in good shape, sir.
Okay. All right. Committee, anything? Okay, please proceed. Thank you.
All right, sir. I'm going to turn it over to Director Shepard and for the Veteran Skilled Nursing Facility update.
Thank you, General. Again, good morning, Mr. Chairman and committee. I did want to introduce Mr. Ryan Scranton from the construction office. If you have any specific questions on the project, turn those over to Ryan. But otherwise, again, this is just a picture of the facade of a skilled nursing facility. But one thing you will note is we have moved the completion date back to July of 22. It was in June. We've had some issues with a subcontractor and then also just some supply issues that have caused us to move that back. Are there any questions on this slide?
But just real quickly, welcome, Mr. Stratton. Thank you for being here this morning. Appreciate it. Appreciate your patience. Glad we finally got to the skilled nursing centers. Please take it away, Director.
All right, if we could go to the next slide. Again, you've seen this slide before. This is just a depiction of the location of the 3 cottages up at the veterans home or in proximity of the veterans home. Next slide. So what we've done here is to show you a picture of where we were at the last time that we met with you as a committee, and then where we are within a week or so of today with the cottages. Next slide. And again, this is just a depiction of what we think the staffing requirements are and where we are in the process, which basically we're still awaiting authority for those positions to then go out and hire those positions or begin the process of hiring those positions.
Mr. Chairman.
So, Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
So, Mr. Shepard, when you say awaiting authorization for those positions, authorization from the federal government or from the state or appropriations or who?
Franz is online.
Oh, Franz is online. Well, can I turn that question to Franz?
Yes.
Absolutely. Heather, can we allow
Mr. Chairman, Franz Fuchs, oh, there he is. If he speaks, he'll appear.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the Joint Transportation Transportation Committee. My name is Franz Fuchs. I'm a policy analyst, Department of Health. To your question, we are submitting a budget request this upcoming session for 36 positions and $5.1 million of general funds for those positions listed on the slide.
So, Mr.
Any
Just
questions?
follow
of
up,
the
Mr.
department? Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you.
Co-Chairman.
Thank you. So Franz, those positions will then be state-funded positions? Am I correct, or are they going to be reimbursed by the federal government?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, it's a little complex, so we'll need the state funding initially to recruit the positions. But once the facility begins generating revenue, we foresee it being able to operate on its own, be budget neutral in that sense. Similar to how the retirement center is funded, the retirement center in Basin receives most of its revenue and is self-funded through Medicare and Medicaid largely. The Veterans Home Nursing Facility would receive some funding from the federal government in terms of a per diem for veterans, but then we'd augment that with Medicaid and where appropriate Medicare funding and private pay revenue. And so those that mix of revenue would be able to fund those positions going forward. But we're asking for it in general funds up front simply because they're, it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. And you'd be able to hire the staff to be able to operate the facility to generate the revenue.
Go ahead.
Follow up. So with those funds, has the request already been put into appropriation, and is it coming through the military department or the Department of Health?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, it's going to be coming through the Department of Health's upcoming budget request. So the budget's been is going through the process. I think the governor released it's in the release from the governor, but it is in section 048.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Gentlemen, please proceed. Oh, Senator Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, so that would be a one-time only request for that 15 million. Then after that, it pretty well self funds itself. Is that what I'm hearing?
Franz, are you still on there?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, it's just to clarify, it's right now it's a $5.1 million general fund ask. But ideally when it's the facility becomes self-funded, we look to, for example, if you look at the retirement center budget item, those are now, I think, other funds for the most part. And that's basically the other funds is a mix of Medicare, Medicaid, and in this case, in the case of the nursing home at Buffalo would be VA per diem.
Okay, Senator Anderson, any follow-up? Good? Okay, gentlemen, please proceed.
All right, actually, that's the end of our presentation unless Mr. Chairman, the committee has any other questions.
Anything else on our facility up at Buffalo, progress, et cetera? Sounds like maybe after pandemic sorts of things, Mr. Stratton, we've gotten back on track a little bit. Are we doing okay on that construction site up there?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, Ryan Scranton, Project Manager for State Construction Department. Yeah, sir, I would say, with the issues we've had with COVID and labor issues and material issues, we're doing really well and back on track and making progress. So very pleased.
Mr. Scranton, thank you for all your oversight up there and your efforts on behalf of that skilled facility. And we look forward to staying in touch with you as we go along here.
Thank you.
So committee, anything else? All right. Thank you, Director Shepherd. Appreciate that. General, we're coming back to you, by golly.
All right, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Well, I think you all have the slides in hand. I'm on the page number 1, which is entitled the Annual Sexual Harassment and Sexual Assault Report. So if the committee remembers, committed to do this about a year ago, both to the governor and this committee to provide a report to this group about the status of sexual harassment, sexual assault within the military department. If I move to the next slide, which is slide 18, it's a quick overview of what we're going to discuss. I'm going to talk very briefly about the demographics, talk about sexual harassment first and assault, cover the required annual training, go over the reporting options, really give you a back brief of the climate survey that we conducted. And then I have some other sensing sessions that were also informative. Give you the assessment by the commanders, and then talk some possible legislative actions, and then have a closing.
So General, just real quickly, if I could jump in, I appreciate you reminding the committee that it was a little over a year ago that this committee had requested this report. So we've been pointing to this effort for quite some time, and essentially awaiting all that you wanted to share here in November with us before we were to consider any action or help with anything in terms of statute, certainly with rules or regs or recommendations from the committee. And so we arrived today with that in tow, and appreciate all the efforts that have led up to this, and we look forward to your report. So General, thanks for letting me clarify that. It's been about a year in the making, this agenda item today, so we appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. What you'll see before you here in this slide is really sort of an executive summary plus of a more in-depth report I provided to the governor. There's certainly that report is available to everyone. As a matter of fact, I thought I may have sent it to you, but as on further checking, it may not have gotten to you, but I'm certainly no issue of you having to see the whole report. So this is kind of an executive summary of what that has done. If we move to slide 19, it just gives you a real quick look at the demographics of the Wyoming Military Department. Probably two items of interest that I want to bring out here. First off is all the different statuses within the Wyoming Military Department that we have, which is instructive and informative because we deal with sexual harassment and sexual assaults based on what status that an individual was or was not when they occurred. So we have our state agency and state employees, our federal agency and federal employees, and even those on the federal side are divided in a couple different ones. First off, we have our Title V employees, which is strictly a civilian employee that's employed by the Wyoming Military Department. It's a federal position, but they do not have to be a member of the National Guard to serve as a Title V employee. They may, but they do not have to be. If you contrast that with our Title 32 technicians, they must be a member of the Wyoming National Guard in order to hold that position. They're both still federal employees, but there's a little bit different rules governing each one of them. We have our Air National Guard and Army National Guard. We have active Guard and Reserve, which are, you could see as equivalent to active forces. They're compensated the same way, but the difference is they're under Title 32 or the governor's control rather than Title 10, which would be under the president's control. And then we have our traditional serving military department members that generally, have duty 1 weekend a month and then a 2-week annual training period that goes on. So a lot of different statuses that are made up by that. In total, the Wyoming Military Department is just short of 3,200 personnel, give or take on the day. If we take a look at the split between male and female, you'll see that it's almost 78% male and 22% female. With the National Guard comparison being we're slightly higher, more females than the national average. So that's just a quick look at our demographics, if that makes sense. If we move to the next slide, slide 20, this was an attempt to try to give some context to sexual harassment and definitions of that. Sexual harassment really is on a spectrum. If you look at the very worst side of the spectrum where we call that quid pro quo, this for that, which means somebody could say, you do not get this promotion if you do not have sex with me or provide some sort of favor along on that line, all the way to the other end of the spectrum where it could be an innocuous comment or a calendar that's hung up that somebody views as inappropriate. Sexual harassment has that sort of long line of instances in it. If you look at the quid pro quo side of that, those are the things that generally the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the council, they will generally take a hold of those. If you look at the end of the spectrum and what we would say the lower end of the spectrum, that calendar or perhaps somebody says something inappropriate, it's usually dealt with the supervisory and the chain of command piece of that. So on the sexual harassment side, that's how it's defined. And then that's sort of the two limits of the spectrum on that piece.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, So what you have on the slide applies to all of the statuses or only specific statuses?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, great question. That is everybody but the state piece of that. This is what that would apply to, is that, yep. So our state employees would be the only ones that wouldn't have this particular one, but
Thank you.
yeah. All right, if I move to slide 21, let's get into the discussion about sexual harassment in Wyoming. For fiscal year 2021, we had one formal hostile work environment complaint that's currently under investigation and under the jurisdiction of EEOC. We did have 3 informal complaints, all of them along the hostile work environment spectrum, that were filed with the EEO staff, but really were handled to the extent that the complainant felt that they needed to be to get handled at that informal level. We do have at least 5 issues at the unit level that we're tracking that were at that lower end of the spectrum. I think we could say that there could be more of those because there's not a formal reporting mechanism for those informal actions, the calendar hangings and that sort of thing. But we know of at least 5 of them that occurred. If I look at the trends of those, supervisor against subordinate appears to be a common theme. And 2 of the 5 incidents were committed by personnel not in the Wyoming National Guard. So it happened while they were away from our chain of command. So of the 5 that we're talking about, 3 of them were National Guard members in the Wyoming Military Department, 2 were not.
So General, when you say by personnel not in the Wyoming National Guard, that could be one of our Guard members off in another state or performing duties in firefighting or whatever and running into something somewhere else, or?
Mr. Chairman, I'll talk it in more detail in the next slide, but yes, sir, they're not members of our Wyoming Military Department. So a member of another state's Guard, an active component member, could just not our members. A civilian could.
Okay,
Yep,
thank you.
just not us.
Thanks.
I move to slide 22. I really try to give a synopsis of those 5 informal ones. So this first one was on the Army side, sexual harassment of an enlisted female soldier on our DC inauguration support mission. So that was the perpetrator on that one was not a member of the Wyoming National Guard, and so we didn't take any disciplinary action on our side of the chain of command to do that. We just made sure that that didn't happen again, and that the victim was taken care of for any services they requested to get that done. The next one is on the air side. There were some inappropriate comments made to an enlisted airman by a supervisor. We did an investigation of that. The final legal review is complete, and the offender ultimately resigned from the AGO program and will retire based on that one. The next one, a male NCO was disrespectful to a female lower enlisted soldier from another state. And that was actually happened up, I believe, at Camp Guernsey. We had a unit that was from outside the state coming to training here, and they were disrespectful. But the command moved that individual to a work center so they wouldn't have any more contact with that one, and did counseling of that particular individual. The next one was a soldier was propositioned by a coworker over a social media app. And so this one also, the perpetrator was not from the Wyoming National Guard. And we just, again, got the 2 people separated and removed them from the work center so they wouldn't have any, and then formed the chain of command on the other side. And lastly, there's an allegation of a hostile work environment that just happened this last June. And the investigation is complete on that, but we're pending legal review before we have any more information on that. I think the big thing that I would like to point out is that we do take action each and every time an allegation is concerned. We take some investigation if it comes to our level. We go take a look. We just we can't we don't tolerate this idea that sexual harassment or a hostile work environment could take place. And each and every time that an allegation occurs, we take a look at it. All right, let me talk to the next slide on slide 23. This is an external assessment. When I first became the adjutant general, and it says FY20 here, and I think it's actually FY19. The governor, we initially talked to me, said, hey, I want you to take a look at sexual harassment and sexual assault in the department, make sure that we're doing everything that we can. So really did an initial just sort of sensing session from outside of the organization. And we asked the South Dakota National Guard to come in and, hey, come take just a sample of a random sample of our female population and see, help me get an idea of what's going on out there in terms of equal opportunity and that sort of thing. So South Dakota came in and they did a pretty informal look, I will tell you.
General, just a quick interruption there. This was in part driven, I think, if memory serves, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but some national issues that had begun to crop up. And I think that in part, this was driven by many of us just wanting to make sure that the house is in order. Is that correct? I mean, that played a role.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And I will caveat that with, this was prior to the Fort Hood incident that really got most of the attention given to this. This was sort of my own attempt to get a sense of what was going on in the department just coming in as the adjutant general.
Thank you for that. Yeah, please proceed.
See that? Yep. And this one happened to be just against the really evaluating the air guard. That was the one it took. That's where the information was coming from. And that's what we were trying to get after, is what's going on in the air guard there. So that was also based on a survey that had come up, and I'll talk about that in a little bit as we go forward. But that just talked real quickly, the methodology, but the findings were, there were two specific areas that it really came up with. An organizational process and a senior leader were highlighted as improvement needed when they came out of this. And I'll talk about in a little bit. Overall, though, the vast majority of our females reported positively on their experience in the culture and what was going on there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. But let me go to the next, this next slide, which continues to kind of get after the recommendations that South Dakota had for us, is really get an action plan for this particular squadron and for those two areas of improvement. So we did that. We took a look at that. We actually, the leader that moved on, we moved them out of that position, and we did some retraining in that squadron. And if you look at the 2019 climate survey, really low participation rate, talking about those two particular areas, 46 upon, trust in senior leadership was fairly low. Satisfaction with organizational process was pretty low. We came back, in 2021 with the same thing, had a much higher participation rate, and a much improved trust in senior leadership and total response satisfaction with organizational process. So in that particular incident, when we looked at that one unit with the issues that it was having, it was clear that something had to be done. And I thank the leadership team for taking that seriously and making those changes.
General, why the disparity in percentage of participation on those two surveys? What was that all about?
Yes, sir. I will tell you, I think this is just me guessing. I don't think there's a definitive answer. I will think it's two. One is, I don't know that I really believe that if you survey me, you're going to make any changes. I think that plays into it is one. And then the second one is along that same line is, if you're not going to make changes, I'm not sure I'm going to put myself out there to do that. So that's my opinion. That could be wrong. It doesn't say why the participation was low, but that's what I would attribute it to, sir.
Committee, questions thus far? Okay, please
I
proceed.
think it's important to remember this is an anonymous survey. So, there's not a sense that we're going to go back out and reprise against them, but that's what we do. That kind of is what's going on in the sexual harassment area of this. I'm going to talk a little bit more of that when we get to the end, but let me move to slide 25 and sexual assault. Sexual assault, a little bit different set of circumstances there. This is a crime. And if you look at the definition from the Department of Defense here, it gets down specifically into rape and sexual assault, aggravated sexual conduct, and attempts to make any of those acts. I think it's important to know that in the National Guard, we never investigate sexual assaults. It's against federal law for the National Guard to investigate itself. We always go to local law enforcement to do that. That's where the investigations take place. If for some reason local law enforcement were to find that they would not accept the case or would not do it, there is an administrative process through the Office of Complex Investigations at National Guard Bureau that would refer a case to do something. It's important to know that it's an administrative action once it gets to OSLI. There's not any criminal thing that can happen to somebody. So we really rely on our law enforcement folks to do that investigation and that piece of that. So that's probably the biggest thing is to assure the committee that we don't investigate our own sexual assaults at all.
So General, on that front, have you had good response from our, from our sheriffs and chiefs of police and from our courts?
Yes. By and large, I would say yes. There have been instances, though, where that has not been the case. If you recall the work that we did last year on the military code, the genesis of that request was because we felt, and there's a longer story to this, the local law enforcement ultimately decided not to prosecute a case. We felt there was enough there that should have been prosecuted. As we went to go down that road of trying to make that happen and initiate a court martial, we discovered we couldn't. Our code was so outdated that we actually couldn't do it. So I will tell you, by and large, we rely very much on our local law enforcement to do what they can. They will make a decision about what they think they can prove and what they think they cannot prove. And so in some of those instances, we think maybe there's more evidence there, and we have an obligation to probably try that individual in the military court.
Generally, a good working relationship. Do you feel like, General, the work we did with legislation last year has put us in a better position then?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely.
Okay.
We haven't had to go down that route yet, but it absolutely gives us the opportunity if we need to go there.
Okay.
Chris, would you say anything different?
No, sir. Mr. Chairman, the bill that was passed last year that revised our state military code was well done, and I appreciate this committee's support for that bill. And I think it has set us up in the future to take care of a situation. Law enforcement, the local district attorneys in Casper and Cheyenne, and the county attorneys in the remainder of the counties, they have to make a judgment call. And, unfortunately, sexual assault often happens between them, often a man and a woman in a closed environment with no witnesses, and they're very tough cases to prosecute. So I understand when those civilian prosecutors dealing with a high caseload have to make tough decisions about not to prosecute. So I like that we now will have that ability, if it involves a military member perpetrator, a member of the Wyoming National Guard, to do something about that.
Committee, anything? Okay, please proceed, General.
Yes, sir. If we move to the next slide, page 26, I'll get into a little more detail. So for the fiscal year 21, we had 6 sexual assaults reported. 3 of those were from previous years other than 21. 3 of them actually occurred in fiscal year 21. You'll see an annotation there that says 3 restricted and 3 unrestricted. So sexual assault reports are categorized into those 2 areas. A restricted report is simply when the victim chooses to say, hey, listen, I was assaulted, but I do not want the chain of command involved, and I don't want local law enforcement involved. I just want to avail myself of the services, whether that's medical, psychological, any of those things. So the chain of command and local law enforcement really does nothing, has no evidence. The victim will not talk to them. Which is a restricted report, that's exactly what it means. The only thing that we can know is that there was a victim, and we offer services. So there were 3 restricted reports that happened of those 6, and 3 unrestricted. An unrestricted report says, hey, listen, the chain of command can be notified, law enforcement can be notified, and there's a little more information that we can gather from that. So back to the 6 we had, 3 of those restricted, 3 unrestricted. I think it's important to what we're trying to create here is an environment where our soldiers and airmen and our employees can come and report to us. We have to know what's going on in the force and able to correct behavior, to establish our standards, and to hold people accountable if they violate what our code and our duty is. So it's important that we take this exceptionally seriously. And when a victim wants a restricted report, we got to respect those wishes, even though that it's somewhat frustrating from the standpoint of the command that they're not able to have all the information. That is the victim's call, and we have to respect that. And the same with those that are willing to come forward in an unrestricted environment and say, hey, listen, we trust you, chain of command, to do the right thing. We must, again, continue to do the right thing and give them the very best of our ability to solve their issues. So that's what just wanted to make sure you were tracking of that. As we look at the trends, there's a couple that jump out at me specifically. 83% of our cases are associated with travel outside of the state, someplace when they get away from their battle buddy or their wingman. There's a much higher potential for sexual assault when they go away for training, when they're not in our environment, 83% of the time. Secondarily, alcohol is involved in a large percentage of the time too. So either the victim or the perpetrator or both are under the influence of alcohol. So those are the 2 significant trend areas that we found with our sexual assaults. Military on military, 67% of those. In all 6 cases, the victim was in a military status of some kind for this last year. Perpetrator has not been a Wyoming Guardsman. Of the 6 that occurred, only 1 was a Wyoming Military Department employee perpetrator. So the other 5 were outside of this organization. Female victims and male perpetrators, we only had 1 case where it was female on female. The other cases were a male on female. And about 67% of the time, the victim knew the perpetrator. So those are kind of the things we pulled out of that. We go to the next case 27. I talk a little bit more about the 3 unrestricted reports that we talk about. If you can see across the top, the victim's gender in each case, there was a female. The perpetrator's gender in 2 of the 3 cases, it was male. The year of the assault, 1 was a previous FY, but they felt they could report it now, and the other 2 were during the FY. If we looked at the status, Title 32 at annual training is the first one, but the other 2 were in a Title 10 status when they were out away from the military department. 2 of the perpetrators were not members of the Wyoming Guard, 1 was. The victim and perpetrator ranks is significant in that these were lower enlisted, and the perpetrator and the victim were both of equal rank in all 3 of these cases, which is a little interesting and probably not something I would have guessed prior to examining the data. Law enforcement status, Laramie County Circuit Court on this first case is, and then the other 2 are open. They've been referred to, those 2 cases, local law enforcement did not take those up. So we've referred them to the Office of OSLI.
So just to make sure I understand, General, the Office of Special Investigations is the national arm of the National Guard?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman, I screwed that one up. So this is the Office of Special Investigations. This is actually the Active Air Force is handling this. That what you were going to tell me, Chris? Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, OSI, the Office of Special Investigation, is a criminal investigative body for the active duty Air Force, like the FBI. So they were referred there because it happened in a Title 10, actually at a Title 10 base. So the jurisdiction criminally was actually originally in the Office of Special Investigations. That's a Title 10 thing, active duty. All of the branches have that. It's their criminal investigative function. So local law enforcement was not involved because in those 2 cases, it happened on an active duty base.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Committee, any questions thus far? Okay, please proceed, General.
All right, to the next slide. Just wanted to cover some of the training that occurs in the Wyoming Military Department. Across the Wyoming Military Department, as a part of every new employee that comes in, full-time employees, our drill status guardsmen, our M-Day soldiers, all get training on sexual assault and sexual harassment and how the prevention thereof. That's ubiquitous across the department. Each service has some slightly different training requirements that they do. On the Army Guard, it's included in the initial training, and members receive annual face-to-face, what we call SHARP training, sexual harassment, assault response prevention. Plus, they do buddy aid and the recruiters in the recruit sustainment program, the pre-command course, and for senior leaders. Air National Guard has the same thing. It's included in basic military training and officer training school curriculum, and all members receive sexual assault training on an annual basis. Federal civilians, depending on which service they're assigned to or they're paid for, they'll go under that same kind of training that they have. And then the state of Wyoming's, they have initial baseline training, and they receive some additional refresher training if they're assigned to a supervisory role. So there's a lot of training that goes on a regular basis. One of the things that we've done since the last Adjutant General is any new person that comes in, even if they're prior service, they have to receive a briefing on suicide prevention and a briefing on sexual assault and sexual harassment prevention before they complete their first drill. So anybody, even though if we don't raise them up, they come to us afterwards, we make it clear that it's not tolerated, and this is what to do if you see it. There is even some more advanced training if we go to slide 21.9. Army National Guard has what we call additional duty victim advocates. So they get 80 hours of training upon selection and 32 hours every year after that. The Air National Guard has additional duty victim advocates, and they receive 40 hours of training and 32 hours every year after that. On the Army side, there's 21 Army victim advocates. On the Air has 6. The disparity is largely because of the Army being spread out across the state, the way it is. We have armories in every corner of the state, and so we get our victim advocates spread out across that. Air National Guard is located, in Cheyenne, so a lower need of having that many victim advocates.
So General, those Army victims advocates, are they dispersed throughout the state, or are they mostly centered in Cheyenne and travel? How does that work?
Mr. Chairman, for the Army side, they are spread out throughout the state. They're assigned to commands, and that is to prevent them having to travel, so that if a victim were to happen in a unit, say in Sheridan, the victim advocate right there would be able to service that victim. So that's its whole purpose.
Thank you.
So if we move to slide 30, this is some sexual harassment reporting options for military employees. And this just kind of depicts all the different formal and informal reporting options, the way that you can talk about it. So on the Army National Guard, there's a military equal opportunity staff at all the major units. So the brigade, the training site, all those colonel commanded units, they have the ability to have an equal opportunity officer. Also, our Inspector General, which for those of you not familiar with the Inspector General process, that is a individuals outside of the chain of command, that their charge is to ensure that they remain impartial and they serve as soldiers and airmen impartial outside the chain of command. So they're able to do that. And then each one of them has their sexual harassment and response program offices. So those are the formal reporting offices on the Army National Guard, the Air, and the federal side. Informal is also the chain of command, unit leadership, and also have a tag hotline that any individual in the department can call with an issue, and we'll deal with it. If they absolutely don't think that they have no trust in their leadership, or they're very uncomfortable with it, they can call that tag hotline to get that done. So that's the harassment side of this. Any questions on reporting options? The next slide, on slide 30, on page 31, is really the sexual assault reporting options. And so those are categorized in those two areas that I talked about. On the left hand is the unrestricted reporting option, and on the right hand is the restricted reporting options. And I'll just give you an opportunity to look at those. Again, unrestricted means the chain of command has visibility of it and can take a more proactive role. Restricted, not as much. there's really no details that we can have. But there are plenty of services that we can provide to assist victims. If we move to page 32, this is the 2021 Unit Climate Survey results. So back to what Chairman Landon had initially talked about, was there was an incident that happened at Fort Hood that really shone a light on sexual assault and sexual harassment in particularly, this was an Army case at Fort Hood. So as a result of this, the Secretary of Defense, after the results of the Fort Hood investigation came out, directed every Department of Defense entity across the United States and the Department of Defense to conduct a climate assessment survey. So this survey is something that traditionally we do every 2 years. And I'll talk about it a little bit more. It's called the DEOC survey. And the Secretary of Defense had said, hey, if you haven't done a survey in greater than 90 days from the Fort Hood incident, you're going to do another one. So we were lucky in that sense that we were ready to do our next survey anyway. So this survey was directed for everybody, and we completed that probably last April and May, with results coming out in June. So as you look at the background here, it was from the 20th of February to the 26th of April. It's included its normal survey, but then we added sort of 10 open-ended questions, which allowed our respondents to elaborate on whatever they wanted to. And again, this was an anonymous survey that went out to everybody so that they couldn't be traced on what's going on. So this was primarily targeted at our military employees. There's some survey issues, gaps in there that will say state of Wyoming and the federal civilian employees, they were not included in that one. That wasn't part of the DEOC's mandate. I was pretty interested in the results of the 2021 unit climate survey results because I wanted to be able to track trends. If you recall, I say we do this about every 2 years. But interestingly thing that the survey also changes about every 2 years. They ask different questions, they format it different. So it's a little bit more difficult to track a trend from say 2013 and 2016 to 2021 because of the way the data is presented. We made a pretty good stab at it, doing our own kind of look at it. And I'll talk about some of those as we've gone forward. As we continue to talk, but that was one of the sort of challenges that we had was they really took a different tact this year with this survey and changed up the questions quite a bit. There were some areas of concern that came out in the 21 data. The first one was organizational communication. Second was high stress work environment, leadership support, morale issues. Thirdly was career development, work-life balance and challenges. And this last one that came out was some areas still where we had inappropriate jokes, comments, and stories in the workplace, including gender and race that came out of that. So that's obviously still concerning to us as leaders that happens in the workplace. So that's sort of the background of how we did that. Really, the 51% participation rate and the 47% participation rate is it may not sound very good, but that's a significant increase of what we've had previously and certainly statistically significant. So I feel pretty confident that we got some good data from that. This next slide on page 33 is we pulled out some of the questions and some of the responses on these next 2 pages, so you had to take a look at it. If you look at on my slide, this second one down has a red box around it because has someone from your unit told sexual jokes that made you uncomfortable, angry, or upset? That was by far the lowest or the worst that the military department did. That's where we found out. 78% said never, but that means, there's 21% that said they had heard that on the Army National Guard side. If you go over to the Air National Guard, only 86% that said they'd never heard that. So there's still about 13% that had experienced some sort of sexual jokes, innuendo, that sort of thing. I think it is illustrative, though, that you take a look at these other, has someone from a unit mistreated, ignored, excluded, or insulted you because of your gender? 93% of our soldiers said, no, that's never happened. 94% of the air soldiers or airmen said, no, that's not happened. Has someone from unit displayed, showed, or sent sexually explicit materials? 90% said it hasn't happened. 97% on the air said it hasn't happened. So not something I would necessarily point to and say that's good stuff, because that should never happen. So I'll give you a moment to kind of review this page and the next page of those climate survey results.
Committee, questions? Any, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering, since the survey was updated, perhaps considering I think it was 83% of the occurrences happened in travel and also with alcohol involved. Was there any thought given, or did any of the questions that were, used relate to any of those to perhaps gain some information that could benefit on preparation of training lessons going forward?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Henderson, the DEOC survey did not address those the alcohol, and once they leave away, that was entirely the leadership's assessment of this. I will tell you, and I will address that here later in there, how we've gone after that, sir.
Okay, please proceed.
If we move to slide 35, this is the Inspector General's sensing session results. So if you look at it, as I take a look at how I assess this in the Wyoming Military Department, I use the South Dakota sensing session. I used the sensing session here from the DEOC survey that was directed by the Department of Defense. And then I also instructed our Inspector General team that when they go out and have sensing sessions with the units, I want you to ask about this particular issue and find out what they're telling you. So again, that's privileged information. It only goes to me as the Adjutant General, and it's all anonymous. And so I did ask them, though, to make sure, just to get another touch point of what's going on out there in the force. So just this kind of describes a little background. Right now, it's a Title 10 officer on active duty from the active duty Air Force, and a non-commissioned officer who lead our State Inspector General's office. They report directly to the National Guard Bureau, but I do have the ability to provide guidance, areas of emphasis that I want them to look at, anything that I want them to take a special eye on, and that's what I did in this case. So they go out every drill to talk with units as a whole and get a sensing session for them, and it's on a whole host of issues. For training year 2021, they visited 6 sites with 300 service members contacted. If we go to 36, this is the identified trends. There was a concern over preference for schools and deployments based on status and career field. There was a prevalence of offensive jokes, comments, and stories based on gender. Not enough focus on retention, reports of issues accessing medical care, and then there's concerns about the force of the mandatory COVID vaccination. So those are the kind of trends that they came up with this last one. But obviously what's of concern to all of us here today is this prevalence of offensive jokes and comments and stories that came out. So now we've heard it. We've heard it in DEOC survey. It says, hey, this is what's going on. And now we've seen it from our IG going forward. Any questions from the IG side about the IG before we go on?
I think we're good. In general, we're coming up on about 10 minutes to a hard stop.
Yes, sir.
So thank you.
All right, let's move to the next slide then, 37.
And by the way, that means wherever we end up, we'll just pick it up right after lunch. I didn't mean to suggest we've got to get through more pages.
Yes, sir. I think we are getting there though, sir. So this is the assessment from Brigadier General Justin Walrath, who is our commander of our Air National Guard. And what I'll talk about this front here. What his assessment is that We do not have a widespread problem with sexual harassment or sexual assault. Only 3% of the airmen responded negatively when asked if command leaders responded to sexual harassment. The response from the 2021 sexual harassment and assault survey really showed a low instance of that. We do have occurrences of inappropriate comments being made. So that I think we've established that. So he's also gone down the road of identifying some Air National Guard gaps. Right now, there's not a full-time equal opportunity resource at the airlift wing that can address some of those. The Air Force eliminated the part-time drill military status EO commission officer position. So really, we're going to have to take that out of hide as we go forward. We do have a fully qualified officer to the EO position that's coming, despite no manning from NGB. We'll take that out of hide as we get going. So really quickly, his plan moving forward, he's got a work group that's going to get after this discussion of workplace hostility. He moved that EO officer away from the chain of command just to give a little bit more comfort to a victim or anybody with a complaint that you're not having to walk past the wing commander's office to get to them to try to keep that away from it. And then in the interest of some of that time, we really have no tolerance for that kind of verbiage within the force. And we continue to train it, and we'll continue to hold those accountable. Anybody who doesn't force that.
General, when you talk about removing that particular position, if we can get it back, I mean, it's an idea that you have apparently that you want to get that position back on board. How do you remove it from the environment? Do you have to go to a different location completely? Is that the idea on that? And then I wanted to follow up with the outside contact when you get all the way to a sexual assault, for example. You know, it seems like maybe that's difficult to find people to investigate that or whatever. And that's just of interest to me too. So those two things, can you just comment on those?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think on the first one, it's the first one is how do you sort of get it out of the environment? What you want to be able to do is provide some assurance to a victim or somebody that is claiming equal opportunity violation that they have the ability to do this. So get it away from the chain of command. And I think that it could be a different floor of the building, a different location. It's just so that they have some assurance that they can go there and chain of command isn't automatically going to know that what's happening there. So I think it's a physical
have some sense of privacy.
Yes, sir, to get that done. On the second one, I'll talk about that when I get to my assessment, if that's all right.
Oh, okay. Thank you. All right.
We'll get that point going. So that was General Waller's sort of assessment of how he saw it going forward. Page 38 is General Nesvik's assessment. And I will tell you, General Nesvik, because this the Fort Hood incident happened on an Army installation and was primarily Army findings, he took it probably a little more personally, as did I, about getting after this particular response to Fort Hood. So he was very aggressive. He formed his own task force to take a look at it in advance of anything that we had done here. And they did a really in-depth look at all the policies, all the procedures that are going on. But what his assessment was, Wyoming Army National Guard requires additional effort at all levels to address ambient sexual harassment or inappropriate comments. So this term ambient sexual harassment was new to me until probably this year. And what that means is it's sort of hidden. It's sort of like somebody not necessarily saying something, but something, maybe tolerating something that's said, or maybe there's some physical touching or hugs. It's ambient in the air that it doesn't come right out and sexual harass somebody or that, but it could create conditions where it could lead to that sort of discussion. So that's what the term ambient sexual harassment gets after, was that piece. So in his assessment, he may have a unit that would tolerate some ambient sexual harassment. Little mention of sexual assault and soldiers are reporting feeling safe in the DEOC survey. But he's going under the assumption that there are probably more incidents going on out there than are being reported. And so he went after that. If you took a look at his sharp task force, they had about over 70 recommendations about how do we do a better job in the military department and in the military as a whole. And I'll let you get a chance to read those. One of the things to your question, Mr. Chairman, is we're kind of caught, the Department of Defense and particularly the Department of the Army is very interested in resourcing these sort of things in the future, but it's going to take a while. I've heard some dates out to 2028 and 2029 to get resources that will address some of these things. And that's simply too late for us. So we're sort of trying to balance, trying to get resources out of our own hide to address some of this stuff, to make our environment better, knowing that those above us are still trying to do the same thing and are going to come up with a solution for us as well. So we're trying to balance being able to do the right thing as I see it, as we see it, knowing that they're probably going to come down with some additional resources, some additional mandates, some additional things. Also, I believe, the United States Congress has an interest in this, and they will also pass legislation that will affect the way we do this. So we've got, I think we're going to have to be very flexible but still remain foremost in our mind that we tackle this issue and we take it seriously.
So General, just real quickly, I would just comment on your comments right there. I think there are a lot of entities within our society today that are reacting the same way. I spent over 30 years at the college here in this community on the administrative staff and in student services, and all of this that we're talking about here is very familiar to me. We worked very hard through the years, but it was only recently that kind of individual was put in position as an administrator to oversee everything from ADA to Title IX to equal opportunity, all of that stuff. And it's, so I just want to throw that out, that I don't think it's just the military, which inherits members of our society. So it's not, it probably reflects the society as a whole, and we've got work to do all over. So,
sure.
General, that takes us to maybe a stopping point. And committee, again, we've got several legislators who have some things that they need to be at by noon. I'm sorry we haven't gotten further in the agenda. I appreciate those who have come to sit in today, and I'm sorry that we've got to carry this over to 1:15. But we are at a lunchtime and the committee needs to get to that. So, Mr. Co-Chairman, any thoughts before lunch?
Nope.
Okay, we are adjourned until 1:15.